Good morning. As I call this meeting to order on January 25th, 2024, the Land Conservation and Development Commission meeting. And we had just had the privilege of being welcomed by Chief Yonker and the Coquille Indian Tribe. And they have other meetings that they had to attend, but we want to thank them for their hospitality and the great learning that we had this past yesterday and coming into the week. I think we're going to talk more about that in commission business, about our reflections on our time so far. With that, I wanted to say, I think it's time to do the roll. Jan, if you could call the roll.
Commissioner. Good morning.
Sorry, I skipped over your intro. Jan, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair Halova, commissioners, hosts, guests, community members, and staff. Thank you for joining us in North Bend, hosted by the Coquille Indian Tribe at the Mill Casino for the Land Conservation and Development Commission's January 2024 meeting. My name is Jan Guerrero. I'll review a few things to note, including best practices for participation. Recordings of the commission's meetings are available on YouTube. For individuals here in the room who wish to testify, please complete a green comment registration card available on the materials table and hand it to Cindy Smith at the sign-in table. For those individuals joining us virtually, please use the public comment sign-up form on our website. Zoom participants, please rename yourselves with first and last name so we can identify you and bring you forward at your opportunity to speak. And Zoom participants will be in listen-only mode until called on to testify. Again, we thank you all for being here with us today. Chair Halova, the meeting is yours.
So, welcome. I think we're going to do the roll call now.
Commissioner Warren.
Here.
Commissioner Boyer.
Present.
Commissioner Lazo.
Present.
Commissioner Thompson.
I'm present.
Vice Chair Lilac. Chair Halova.
So we're pleased to be here in North Bend for the next 2 days. As mentioned, hosted by the Coquille Indian Tribe's Mill Casino. I wanted to say, commissioners, please make sure to complete your agenda scorecard, which is in their blue binder, before you leave the meeting today. And all this feedback, as always, is very helpful for the staff. So we want to make sure to complete those. I wanted to see if the director had anything to add before we begin.
Just a little note on the agenda. We've been asked to hit our 10 o'clock agenda item precisely at 10 because of guests that may be coming to provide public comment. I do not think my director's report will take us until 10. And so I just wanted to give staff a heads up in the room, particularly Lee, that we may move some agenda items up earlier in the morning in order to keep our 10 o'clock time frame. But I don't see Lee in the room, so perhaps, Deputy, if you are able to find her and let her know, she may be on deck. I just wanted to give folks that flexibility.
And then we have a QR code that's available in the room, which I believe is at that table over there for anybody in the room that wants to get quick access to the meeting materials. I don't know if online there's a similar scenario or people can find the agenda items online on our website. Okay. So now we're going to introduce the commissioners, and commissioners, you just share your name and the region of representation that you have. And then we'll ask the DLCDC staff and invited guests to introduce themselves. And then it's not a long introduction because we're going to have more time tomorrow for commissioner updates. So maybe start at the end of the table with Commissioner Lazo.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'm Commissioner Alan Lazo. I represent the Portland metropolitan area.
My name is Leanne Thompson. I'm a Clatsop County Commissioner. This is my 10th year in that regard. I'm the coastal person for this august body. Thank you.
Good morning, Barbara. Am I on? Okay, sorry. Good morning, Barbara Boyer, representing the Willamette Valley.
Good morning, Stuart Warren, representing Southern Willamette Valley. Nick Lewak, and I represent Eastern Oregon. Good morning, everyone.
And Aniela Halova, I represent the Portland metro area. And so now we're going to go to, I don't know how, do they have to come up to the, or just stand up and introduce yourselves? Okay. Yeah, let's start.
Good morning, everybody. Brenda Bateman, Director of the department.
And I'm Steve Shipsey from the Department of Justice, and I'm counsel to the commission.
Morning, Kirsten Green, Deputy Director.
Good morning, John Dunsmore, Network Administrator for the department.
Good morning, Jan Guerrero, Executive Assistant to the Director and Commission.
Meg Reed, I'm the Fiscal Policy Specialist.
Alexis Hammer, Legislative Policy. Meyer Management. Good morning, everyone. Paul Mason, Senior Policy Production.
Good morning, Dave Carden, Communications and Community Engagement for DLCD. Morning, Dating Network, CFO for DLCD.
Good morning, Brett Estes, I'm the North Coast Report.
Morning, Dr. Deanna Grimstead.
Thank you. Oh. Thank you and welcome. So now we're going to turn the over to the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 3, the director report with the Department of Land Conservation and Development Director Brenda Bateman.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning again, everyone. For the record, Brenda Bateman, Director of the Department of Land Conservation and Development. This morning, I have a director's report to bring to the group. We won't hit on every point that's in here. Of course, I know you've already done your reading, so I just wanted to come back and hit some of the high points, as well as add a little bit more maybe color commentary so that you have some of the details filled in. You'll note that quite a bit of the report is given over to staff changes, and I wanted to spend just a few minutes there for a couple of reasons. One, staff changes is a big part of what we're doing these days and we'll continue to do for some time. So it's worth spending some time on it. But I also wanted to take a moment to recognize each person as they're incoming to our agency, give them a proper welcome, make sure you get a chance to at least hear their name and possibly if folks are with us to get a wave. So that you start to become familiar with some of our staff who are here, and we want to make sure that this is a special place for them that they consider to be their home. And then we also have some folks moving up and some folks moving on, and we want to appreciate the work that they've done for us as well. So since our last meeting, we've had an internal promotion that we're very excited about, and that's there on the first page of your report. Laura Buell has been promoted to be our agency's first community green infrastructure program administrator. This is a program and a position that came out of the last legislative session, and you may already know her from her work or her planning work within our department. I don't think we actually have folks on the screen to say hello this morning. Is that correct, Jan? We don't have folks in the waiting room waiting to pop on and wave. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure you knew about that promotion, that we're very excited that we have a seasoned professional ready to jump into a position that she's very excited about and actually has been going and getting additional certifications and working in the background to be the person that is most qualified for this position. She's excited about it, and we are too. We then have a series of new hires, and so we'll ask the folks that are waiting to pop onto the screen first. We have our accountant one, Chris Marr, and our procurement coordinator, Richard Harvey, and they both reside within our fiscal services team. And so we'll have them come on, and if you could just introduce yourself with your name, maybe where you're coming from and what you expect that you'll be doing here at the department. Welcome. We'll go with Chris first.
How's it going, everyone? So I worked outside of the state for the last 18 years. This is my first time the state of Oregon as accountant one. I was hired to help with the green infrastructure bill with Laura, and I'm really excited and really hope to meet everyone.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome. And Richard. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, how's it going, panel? I'm Richard Harvey. I'm new to the agency. I've only been here a couple weeks. I'm taking over for Jeff as the procurement coordinator one. A lot of federal expertise, but I have not a whole lot of state. So I'm really excited to be part of the team. I'm really excited to join the effort and look forward to doing great things with you guys.
Very good. Thank you, Richard. We have a couple of other folks also who have joined us recently but are not online with us today. Let's see. One is our intern that is coming to us from Portland State University, Silas Carr, and we've asked him to take a look at some of those very old state agency coordination agreements that are currently on our website. If you've ever clicked into those, you'll see that they were, most of them, last updated in the 80s, nicely typed. And have a bit of updating ahead of us. So we've asked him to get them in a format where they're a little bit more accessible digitally, and then to start to read through them for common themes and his observations about what's changed since then, where we need to go from here, and to start partnering with agencies to explore conversations about getting those updated. It will be a large process, so we're not going to jump in too fast, but we have his time while he's working on his master's program over the next year to help us with that. The other intern that we've brought into the director's office to help with some of our policy and legislative work is Aurora, who's here. And I just want to call you forward and see if you would be willing to introduce yourself again, say hello, tell us where you're coming from and what you hope to be doing. Yep, come on up. Yeah, come on.
Good morning, commissioners. My name is Aurora Jettle. I use she, her pronouns. I'm coming over from Representative Dexter's office, where I've worked on housing and land use policy with her over the past year and a half. And so just super excited to be here at DLCD and be supporting Alexis and Palmer in their work with the legislature, and really digging into all of the, and just really digging into all the different policy areas and land use that DLCD works with. And so thank you so much for having me here this morning.
Thank you, Aurora. You did great. I will say Alexis and Palmer are very happy to have additional help on the team, particularly such expertise with a great network and a great reputation already in the Capitol building. The other two folks that we will be bringing on shortly, but are not with us yet. You can see there is a renewable energy specialist, Adam Tate, and transportation and land use planner, Nicole Cross. They'll be joining us in February. So the team is growing, and we're excited about being able to put resources towards the responsibilities that the legislature has given us. You'll note with some of the additions coming on that they are here because of some of the departures that we've had recently. And so Amara Loa, our accountant one, has just recently retired after years of service with the agency. And we wish her well. She apparently has quite a bit of travel planned and some great things up her sleeve. So we're excited for her. And then Jeff Hunt, our procurement officer, his last day is today back in Salem. So a bunch of us were able to send him off with hugs and our thanks. He is going to be promoted into a management position at one of our sister agencies that has a management position for procurement. So he's very excited about that opportunity, and so are we. One staffing change that is not going to take place that we wanted to talk about was at the top of page 2, and just wanted to let you know that although we wrote a very lovely and flowery paragraph about Casaria Taylor and her work with our agency over the years, she's decided to remain with us because this is her home, and I'm so excited that she will be staying. So all the good things still are true, but she's gonna stay, and I can't tell you how excited the entire staff is to retain her expertise. There she is on the screen. Casaria, would you like to defend yourself or say anything?
I'm just really thankful that Brenda agreed to let me stay, and I look forward to many more years working with all of you commissioners and all of the staff.
Thank you. So just an editorial note, because I love to mark up my staff reports. If you want to just put a little X beside that paragraph and say, for future record, did not happen, that would be good. So you'll recall in the future. The next thing, oh, Ethan, please go ahead and come to the microphone and bring your new employee.
Commissioners, good morning. For the record, my name is Ethan Stuckmeyer. I'm the manager of the Housing Division. I want to introduce one new staff that is new to this body, Celestina Tema, who is the new housing planner in the Housing Division within the policy wing of the Housing Division as we've kind of grown. So Celestina joined in November and already has jumped in with both feet and has done some amazing work already. And I look forward to what she's going to be doing in the future. But Celestina, if you want to introduce yourself to the commission.
Sure. Thanks, Ethan. Good morning, commissioners. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here at DLCD. I come from about a decade in housing generally, from real estate, from building tiny homes and ADUs, from nonprofit affordable housing development as well. That was my last home, but I am happy to be calling DLCD home these days. I'm excited to be working alongside the team, as I'm sure you all know, and I continue to learn what a powerhouse has already been staffed. And I will be speaking with you all later this afternoon. So thanks for having me.
I scan the room. Have I missed anyone? Thank you. I'm going to turn to Alexis Hammer next to give us a little bit of an update on our 2025 budget build and all things legislative. And he's joined by Palmer Mason, our senior policy advisor.
Thank you, Director Bateman, Chair Halova, Vice Chair Lilac, members of the commission. My name is Alexis Hammer. I'm the legislative and policy coordinator. I'm just going to give you a very high-level brief overview of where things stand legislatively at the moment. So as you all know, the legislature is about to convene for a short session because it's an even numbered year. And they will begin on February 5th and conclude on March 10th. There are about 20 bills that we're tracking right now, and a number of other issues. For your commission, one of your commissioners will, or a future potential commissioner will be at a Senate confirmation hearing, Ellen Porter from Roseburg. You all got a chance to meet at the last LCDC meeting on February 6th. Then there are bills related to wildfire, energy. Importantly for our agency, because of a reclassification under DAS, or the Department of Administrative Services agency classification scheme, we will be moving from a level 6 agency to a level 5, which corresponds with our growth and responsibilities. Most importantly, as an agency, that means that we'll be adding an assistant director. Is that the right terminology? Yeah, and the assistant director will handle more of our operations, effectively a director of operations. So we'll be relieving Kirsten of the plethora of duties that she has on both the program side and the administrative side, so that we can be focused and have a better division of labor. And then just some minor budget adjustments, as is typical with a short session, updating from the long session's budget. I can pause there and also just mention that there's a major housing bill that I'm sure you all are aware of. And Palmer has been working very closely with the governor's office and our housing team on that. So I'll pass it off, Palmer, for a few words.
All right. Thank you, Alexis. And good morning, commissioners. Yeah, Palmer Mason, Senior Policy Advisor with DLCD. Yeah, you probably heard there's going to be a big housing bill from the governor in the short session, and that would be Senate Bill 1537. It's the sequel to a bill that did not pass on the last day of session in 2023. The governor's office has been working for a number of months to try to change this version, and it is considerably different than what we saw in 2023. So what is this bill comprised of? Well, first, for DLCD, it creates a Housing Accountability and Production Office that we would jointly stand up with the Department of Business and Consumer Services, particularly or specifically the Building Codes Division. And through an interagency agreement, the idea is that this Housing Accountability and Production Office, and you're going to hear the term HAPO a lot, so that's the way I'll refer to it, HAPO would be a resource for local governments and developers around state statutes that apply to housing production. There will be a great deal of money that will be and staffing that will be funneled into this position or to this office. The office will also have new enforcement powers for the agency around enforcing those laws around housing production. That's a very big component of the bill. Another large component that you'll hear undoubtedly a lot of conversation about is the expansion for urban growth boundaries. One-time expansions are allowed under a certain set of circumstances. Depending on the city size, they range from 75 acres to up to 150 acres for larger cities. This is a really controversial part of the bill, but in recognition, I think the governor's office has made quite a bit of changes. And one of the more recent changes to the bill that I think many of you on the commission are going to like is there was a debate going on around whether the demonstration that a city had to make around need included both the land that was needed as well as need based on housing. And so this combines both. So I think we would see that as a positive step. Also in the bill are some changes around the type of hearings that are held on certain limited land use decisions. So think about partitions, and I got my list here, make sure I remember what those are. So site approvals, property line adjustments, partitions, things like that would now, many of those would shift to a type 2. So it would happen not at the planning commission level or at the city council level, it would be more at the desk level, the administrative level. Also, another large component of this bill is to make a certain number and a certain type of design and development standards, whether they be setbacks or aesthetic standards around facades and windows, things like this. Those would be mandatory. So if a developer requested one of those adjustments, the developer would get them. There are a number of conditions about how that happens and exactly what that is, and it is limited to 10 within the project. But all of this is intended to facilitate housing production. I think officially the League of Cities is getting neutral on that bill. And this is one of the reasons why they're only neutral in the bill. They're not supportive of this mandatory adjustment and variance section. But that language has been worked out quite a bit over the last few months. I think the last thing I'll mention, because I think I'm over time as it is that there is a great deal of money attached to this bill. We'll see what the legislature ends up doing. They, of course, control the power of the purse, and they decide what gets appropriated. But the governor is proposing over $500 million along with this bill. And a great deal of it is available for infrastructure planning and infrastructure investment, as well as site preparation for housing, mostly for low and moderate income housing. That's really the emphasis of the bill. So, and then maybe one last thing I will mention back to the HAPO is there is language in the bill about giving HAPO a role in setting the priorities for that infrastructure planning and infrastructure investments and coordinating with other agencies. So if you think back to the owner report from the summer of the fall really of 2022, this particular bill, Senate Bill 1537, does quite a bit to check some of those last boxes around greater agency coordination and additional funding for infrastructure investment, because we called out those two issues as being particularly large barriers to housing. So that's another way this bill is substantially different from the bill last session.
Let's see if commissioners have any questions. Commissioner Warren?
One-time exception for UGB expansions. How are the I guess the justifications different than say our housing capacity analysis work? I mean, cities already have to do that to a certain extent. So are these exceptions, is it just an easier bar to reach, or what does that look like?
So I would respond this way, Commissioner Warren. This is really a different process. Cities will continue to be able to use a housing capacity analysis to justify an expansion through the normal process. But that process will remain the same, where you go through a prioritization about what lands and and the justification of need through the housing capacity analysis. This is a bit different. This is a a process where if a city shows that it meets the criteria, and I can describe that, in a moment in a bit more detail, it's sort of automatically applies. They're automatically eligible to have this one-time opportunity within a 10-year period to proceed with the UGB expansion. There are conditions, and it goes through a comp plan amendment that will be reviewed by the department, and provided that they meet the statutory criteria, the UGB expansion is granted. And there are limited appeal rights with this particular proposal. So how is it really different? It really comes down to the definition of need. And this defines need differently than we would under the traditional process. And it basically comes down to, have you had a UGB expansion in the last 20 years? And if you haven't, there's kind of a more automatic way to go forward with it. And if you have had, this is a city, a UGB expansion within the last 20 years, then it's a question of how much land of that UGB, those previous UGB expansions, have actually been either developed or development ready. And also a consideration of what your, there's a metric there for housing affordability. And it's basically being your housing, I'm going to paraphrase this badly because I don't have the language in front of me, but it's basically you're showing that, or the city has to show that the housing costs are greater than the average for the state. And I might go back and look at the bill, make sure I've said that to you correctly. And but that's the general idea. So provided that, then it's subject to all the conditions on acreage. There are density standards. And then also there's for mid and larger cities, there's concept planning to try to create compact, walkable, mixed use development.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The issue along the coast is often second homeowners and vacation housing. Is any of that addressed in this legislation?
Not in this particular legislation. That was taken up in the bill, House Bill 2001 from the 2023 session. There's a different factor for communities that are impacted in that way, but not particularly in this legislation. Yeah. One other thing I should quickly say about the UGB, I guess this is an important point that I missed on admittedly a very quick flyover, is that it is limited to cities that have either exception lands, non-resource lands, or urban reserves. That's the area in which the expansion is allowed. It's not allowed into resource lands. So that's an important point.
Commissioner Boyer.
Thank you, Chair. So HAPO, can you please spell that out for me? What is it? I did not get it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. As I like to say, it's not an animal in the zoo. It's a housing accountability and production office. Yeah.
So, and where will it be housed? Does it say?
So it'll be a new office that will be created between DLCD and the Building Codes Division. So that's a great question. Physically, I don't know where it'll be housed. We'll have staff at DLCD, and there'll be staff at the division, Building Codes Division, and they will comprise the office. The legislation requires us to work with the other agency to develop an interagency agreement. So I think that's where we'll kind of lay out roles and responsibilities, how we'll share resources, how we'll share responses, because the idea here is particularly for local governments who have challenges, whether it's capacity or resources or just acumen and updating codes, they can come to the HAPO and get help. And that is not just on the zoning side and the planning side, but also on the building code side. And the developers will have that same opportunity if they have a concern with how a city is either applying or interpreting state law or state rules around housing production. This will be a resource in that way. And ultimately, if there isn't a resolution through technical assistance or mediation or collaboration, ultimately enforcement.
So you mentioned that this new organization, or we're not calling it an agency, are we? What are we calling it?
An office. An office.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has enforcement powers?
It does.
I have two questions to this. Do you see that relieving any pressure from DLCD or from this commission? And do you think they would have their own board or commission?
The answer to the second question, it would not have its own board or separate commission. So, policy as that gets set for the HAPO office will again be jointly between us and building codes, but ultimately the director's office at DLCD would be, how DLCD would weigh in and guide the office through a policy way. And really, this is going to be different. Maybe this will help clarify a bit of the role. I don't personally see this office as having a lot of rulemaking power, sort of setting policy. It's more there to take existing law, be that statutory law or rules on the books, and say, how do you apply these consistently, fairly, and correctly? That's a technical assistance role, because a lot of times for local governments, the challenge isn't willful non-compliance. The challenge is resources and capacity and things like that. And so it's addressing those challenges for local governments. And it's a rapidly changing world for local governments around zoning. So it's just hard for them to, particularly smaller ones, to keep up, as it were. But then when you do have those cases where, for whatever reason, there's just resistance or intransigence and there's not compliance with the law, then yes, HAPA will have enforcement authority. I do see that as taking a lot of the shifting a lot of the enforcement away from DLCD to this office as it relates to housing production. And there's a whole lot that happens behind the scenes to get us to housing, infrastructure planning, public facilities, things like that. That'll all continue to happen at DLC. This is just around that body of law that is, here's the procedures that you handle for granting approvals around housing, or here's the requirements, like say the middle housing law from 2019 that you have to allow certain types of housing. I mean, that's the role for the HAPO office, if that helps.
Director Bateman. Thank you, Chair. Again, Brenda Bateman, just wanted to add to that, administratively and practically, the folks that will be joining the HAPA will be inside our housing division. So we will have additional folks coming to the department as part of that initiative and that effort, which is why you'll hear us talking a lot about the behind the scenes support and the need to be sure we're ready for really a large number of folks that may come in the door as a result of this next bill.
So many thoughts all of a sudden. Commissioner Lazo.
Thanks, Chair. I have a couple questions. A specific one about the UGB aspect of SB 1537, and then kind of a general, more philosophical question about that process. The specific question is, I've also seen some talk about a provision related to affordability and UGB expansions. Is that still part of the bill in the process?
Commissioner Lazo, it is. Here's how I recall the language in the bill. So, assuming a UGB expansion goes forward, the infrastructure is there, the property owner developer is building the units. 30% of the units that get built have to be, I'm going to oversimplify here, but basically you have to be for households under 130% of AMI, I think. There's and a certain percentage of those have to be rental only. So the idea is we are sort of providing for the market, part of the marketplace where, the private sector doesn't build as much. And in trying to, the basic idea with this UGB is that by creating enough acreage, so for cities under 25,000, it's 75 acres. For cities over that, it's up to 150 acres. And that is net acres, by the way. So the actual acreage could be a little bit larger. That's enough acreage for a developer to build enough of market rate housing to cross subsidize the affordable housing. The other part of that, which has been pretty contentious, but this is where the bill stands right now, is before the certificates of occupancy can be released on the last 15% of the market rate housing, the affordable housing construction actually has to have start. The hammers have to be swinging, the buildings have to be going up. Yeah, so that's how they handle that. And then there is, and I'll admit, I'm trying to remember what that, like, there is a back-end accountability mechanism if all that doesn't happen. And I'll have to get back to you on what that says exactly. I'm kind of blanking on what that says at the moment.
No problem. Great, thanks. And the general question is, we've seen a lot of, I'm somewhat new to the department side of this. And I feel like we've seen over the last couple of years, a lot of activity around things that are in the purview of the department related to UGB. You mentioned defining the process for some land use hearings. And I'm curious if that's typical from a legislative process to be delving into that area. And should we be concerned about it? And my concern about it specifically is that in some instances, it feels like particularly on the UGB, as an end run by certain aspects of the industry to get what they want or need around UGB, rather than the processes that are developed through the department, that it's done legislatively. So again, over your time, is that a typical process, or does it feel more like pressure from the legislature right now? And should we be concerned? Look, that's a lot. So,
well, it's a really good question, Commissioner Lazo. I'm smiling because, I mean, it's kind of it's a who do you trust more, the legislature or an administrative agency to design these processes? I mean, constitutionally, clearly, the legislature has the authority to decide how that's done, but I think it really comes down to whose expertise do you value? And I'll say it this way: I think certain interested parties think the legislature has more expertise to share on this. I can't speak for the governor's office, but I think what they're trying to do, and I think many legislators also feel this way, is it's a housing crisis. There's a conversation there. I think even a belief that, maybe different methods, different techniques, different approaches have to be tried. I think the governor's office is probably to nobody's satisfaction, and that's how these things usually work. You never satisfy everyone. Has tried to balance the need for more production through increasing land supply with the underlying principles for the land use program: protect resource lands, provide some process. And I think where they really changed a bit is on the demonstration of need. That was not really a feature of the bill back in 2023. So I think the governor's office, I think we all have to objectively acknowledge, has come a long ways to provide a real demonstration of need. I think people can debate whether it's enough or good enough, but at least it's now enshrined in the legislative proposal. And for the environmental community, what I hear, not speaking for them, but what I hear is that their biggest concern now is really around the size of the UGB approach, where it's 75 acres for sort of the smaller to mid cities and 150 acres for larger cities. So yeah, I mean, as an agency person, I mean, I think we would turn around and say that the UG process has been faster and worked more efficiently than it's commonly perceived by many at the Capitol, but they would adamantly disagree with me, right? So here we are at the legislature for them to decide what it really all looks like. So that's a bit of a rambling answer to your very good philosophical question. So
I'll say I just appreciate you and your team being at the tables when those discussions are being had, and for supporting and defending the organization, the agency, and the work that's being done there. So that's vitally important.
Yeah, thank you.
Vice Chair Lilac.
I recall reviewing conceptual allocation of the dollars of the 500 million. And I recall seeing 10 million allocated to climate-friendly housing. Can you share any information about what that means, and is it connected to the department's work? I'm just curious.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair Lilac. Unfortunately, I may have my handy cheat sheet here. Yes, it's there's actually $20 million for climate-friendly incentive funding, and so this is not. This is really being administered by the Oregon Department of Energy. So it's not a DLCD or not this new HAPO, Housing Accountability and Production Office. And it's for, here's what I can recall of it. It's funding for low and moderate income housing projects that will utilize electricity for cooking, heating, and heating water. as opposed to relying on natural gas or fossil fuels or anything like that. So, yeah.
That's where that funding was.
It's going to go to the Oregon Department of Energy. And it's $20
as a
million.
part of this.
It's a part of this.
Okay.
The House Senate Bill 1537.
So a lot of my questions got asked. I had a question if there's going to be preference on the infrastructure dollars to go first to areas in the urban growth boundary before the new expanded.
Chair Oliver, that's a really good question. I don't recall in the language in the bill that prioritizes for the UGB, but I will look at that again. I do recall that it prioritizes for, and most of this is available to cities and tribal nations. And there is general language in the bill that, and other agencies will do more of the direct administration of this infrastructure planning, financing and planning and financing than DLCD, although this HAPO office will have a role. There's general language in the bill about prioritizing towards cities and tribal nations with the greatest need. That's not really defined, so it'll be kind of up to HAPO working with another agency, typically Business Oregon or Oregon Housing and Community Services, to administer this money. There is some direction in the legislature for certain percentage set-asides for cities of different size. I don't recall those details. I might have them here. Yeah, I'd have to probably look that up and get back to you. And one other thing and there's just so much in this bill. It's almost, 65 pages long. So forgive me if I'm forgetting a lot. But one also important thing around infrastructure funding is there's a program now. It was debated in the last session, but it didn't pass, and it included in this to create a revolving loan program where cities will basically be able to take the changes in property taxes that would come a result of a development, and specifically housing developments. And then they will use that money to repay a loan that they borrowed from OHCS to support that housing. And it's only for a 10-year period. But that's another new tool for infrastructure funding. So there's some direct outlays, some direct grants, loans, and then there's this specific revolving loan program that'll be available to cities if they choose to use it.
The reason I bring it up is because when we go to different communities, that seems like one of maybe the number one factor I hear is can't unlock this land in the urban growth boundary because of infrastructure, lack of infrastructure. And so it seems that you would want to pair infrastructure with land first in the urban growth boundary, given that seems to be the constraint of unlocking land.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I think this is a recognition from the governor that land readiness is a key barrier to housing production, and that, you can't prime the pump by, regulation. I mean, you can do a lot through the regulatory tools, but at the end of the day, somewhere there has to be money paid for the planning and the provision of the infrastructure. So this is an attempt to try to address that very issue.
And then the other question I had is because this is all new and exciting in many ways, whether there's any dollars in that bill to provide communication support for our department. I would say our department and building codes division, right? Because it's together to effectively communicate to the private developers, the public, about, the benefits and constraints or whatever it is that come with that new office.
Well, Chair, I appreciate the question because that's a nice segue into something I didn't really talk about. So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is, so as this bill travels through the legislative process, as is typically done, an agency will put a fiscal impact on it. And the fiscal impact is a way to say, here's, for this new body of work, here's what it will cost the state to implement. We've coordinated very closely with the governor's office to work with them on some idea of what our fiscal would look like as this bill moves through the process. And in that, we include some additional communication staff to support not only the HAPO, but also DLCD at large. We have some staffing that will directly support or work for this Housing Accountability and Production Office, but we've also worked carefully with the governor, and I think we have quite a bit of support, fingers crossed, from the legislature to sort of fill in some basic business needs and administrative capacity gaps that we've had at the LCD for a number of years. So, we'll see what happens, but I think the count stands right now that this has the potential of adding like 28 FTEs to the LCD. So that's a pretty extraordinary change. I mean, we're like at 75, 76 now. So we would go, right around a little over 100, I guess. So very substantial change. And we'll see what happens in the session, but, fingers crossed, it looks good that we'll be able to fully staff this housing accountability production office, as well as provide all this additional services and many, from IT communications to administrative, government relations, needs that we've had over quite a long time.
General Director. I love this conversation. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to note too, when an agency goes over 100 FTE, it triggers a number of other reporting requirements and other things that we're asked to look at that small agencies don't, yet have to worry about. So there will be a number of things that change for us once we go over that threshold. We're watching that number very carefully.
Just to add to that, the new designation that we're going from a level 6 to 5. Does that have anything to do with the 100 FTE that you mentioned?
Quite frankly, we've needed to make this move for a while now. And so I've been very careful to say, even if this latest bill does not go through, we still have the need to grow our scaffolding so that we can take on some of these responsibilities. There are a number of other bills you may recall from the last session that created new programs for us that really have nothing to do with this piece. So we needed it even still. And this will surely compound the administrative needs.
Is this new 100 going from 5 to 4? Like, I didn't know if that.
Oh, no, the next jump would be exponential. It would be hundreds and hundreds of employees that, would be the next tier. So we would be at tier 5 for a good many years.
We can talk about the budget build if we have time, but
please.
Okay. So just longer term perspective, wanted to share with you a little update. We have a much bigger update coming to you at the next April LCDC meeting. The agency begins the next budgetary process the second after a budget is adopted. So July, August, we start asking our staff, what are the needs looking into 25 to 27 biennium? Even though this biennium is only 6 months, we're only 6 months into it. Last meeting, we showed with you the big buckets that we're kind of grouping our ideas in. We've refined those concepts a little bit. I'll just share the current status of where those buckets rest. They are planning for housing, promoting climate mitigation and adaptation and resiliency, coastal program investment, supporting local government partners, and promoting efficient operations or matching our responsibilities with our resources. And this governor has taken a more coordinated approach with agencies. In the past, we have typically had agencies independently work on their own agency recommended budget, release them to the governor's office, and then the governor's office generates a governor's recommended budget right in the month or two preceding legislative sessions. This round, we are actually going to be coordinating and sharing a pretty the big list of all of our agency needs and coordinating to make sure that we are aware of other agencies' requests and kind of have a high level understanding between us and the governor's office of what we're going to be going forward with. And between now and the next LCDC meeting, we will be having public stakeholder meetings and with interested parties, and have at least one or two opportunities for the public to weigh in and help inform what we'll be presenting to you all for your input at the next LCDC meeting. And happy to answer any questions, but we'll have a lot more to talk about at the next meeting.
I had a quick question, clarification. Is it the formal process changing for everybody, or is it we're just doing business differently?
It's more of a business differently. The agency recommended budget is still a thing, and the governor's recommended budget, there's still going to be decision thresholds that we make and then that the governor's office will make ultimately.
Business changing is just us thinking to change business, or in general, the approach is like everyone needs to change practice? I'm just trying to say, is it coming from us or is it coming from the governor?
It's coming from the governor's office. Yeah.
Yeah, this governor is very hands-on and they want to see what agencies are talking about and thinking about. Yeah.
Commissioner Boyer.
Thank you. I had the Board of Ag meeting last week and my OWEB meeting the last 2 days. So this topic came up and I'm really fascinated to watch the process because I feel like it's going to give agencies a more focused approach to see what's going to get off the table and what will stay on the table. So I'm really excited to watch how this all unfolds. So thanks.
Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, it occurs to me that in terms of broader philosophical questions, what we're seeing is a change that is both supported and demanded. Some people want to change, some people don't. Everybody wants a voice in it. I don't know about the administrative, I would say load, not burden, but load of responding to community concerns. I don't know if that will have a budgetary impact. I think it will certainly impact our work and our workload, at least for me, to be able to listen effectively to so many passionate differences of opinion, looking for a middle ground that results in increased, I would say, response to human suffering that still maintains and heals planetary concerns as well. Am I seeing am I anticipating appropriately? I don't know to whom I should be addressing this question. That's what I see.
Great, just that. Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. Yes, I think you are. And I think part of our anticipating and trying to build a support structure is that we're not entirely certain what door those comments and those concerns will come through. So we're building our communications, but we're also trying to ask for appropriate analysts and technical program staff who will probably be on the front lines of many of these comments, as well as, you know, regional staff and other folks throughout the department. We're just not sure how and when those phone calls will come, but we are trying to be smart about collecting those comments in a way that is organized, that we know what we've heard from whom, and that we've appropriately responded and not left anybody hanging. So there's a lot to keep an eye on when we're not entirely certain what's going to come next.
I think the interesting part for me is that we just did this anniversary and collected all this information about where do you want to see the next chapter of the organization. So in some ways, I feel like maybe we're ahead, maybe compared to other departments, because we just spent a whole time last year like reflecting on this exact issue. So I actually feel kind of hopeful for this process myself. But yeah.
If I might add, one thing, Commissioner Thompson, that I think DLCD does very consistently, and I would suggest we continue it during the budget conversation, is if we're asking local governments to make changes in response to policy, we're asking for the technical assistance and the grant dollars to support them in that. And I think that's been kind of a touchstone in our budgeting approach. So I think we would continue to do that. And as an aside, I kind of like what you said, healing planetary wounds while dealing with human suffering. That sounds like a pretty good mission statement for the commission. Just a suggestion. So, yeah.
Vice Chair Lilac.
I appreciate the administration question, given that that's what I do with my job, county administrator for Deschutes County, and I can only imagine that there's a lot of hope about this bill passing and providing these resources, but I can only imagine the work that begins as soon as it's adopted, and then the corresponding expectations that you build the office, that you staff the office, that you're delivering the services that, and I could just imagine that beginning March 11th, assuming it's passed as the governor hopes, the real work begins, and it doesn't conclude in a few months. It's a couple of years in the making. So let us know how we can help and not place other demands on the staff and the team while we're all aware of solving the philosophical issues, the policy issues, as well as the administrative burdens I shouldn't say burdens, the opportunities, but there's a lot of work to happen.
Director Bateman. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair. Just so you know, and this comes from having a well-experienced staff. March 11 is all well and good, but we've been working on this for quite some time. And I just wanted to give kudos to Taylor Sorgenfree in the back corner there, our HR manager, who months and months ago said, hey, y'all, we need to be writing these position descriptions. We need to be thinking about how we're going to organize ourselves. We need to start getting things in the queue so that March 11, we can hit send and be first in line over at DAS, because we have to get permissions. Even though the legislature directs us to do something, we still have to get permissions from our Department of Administrative Services to actually correctly classify, correctly pay, correctly recruit, and hire all of those folks. And there's a little, it's why there's often a waiting period after the legislature ends and you start to see things roll out from the agencies, because there's a time where we're asking for permissions. Taylor has made sure that we've got most of it written and are already standing at the door ready to knock and ask for permission on March 11th. So kudos to our internal team who knows how these things work.
And Director, I don't know if there's a way between, when's our next commission meeting?
April 26th.
Okay, so I was wondering if there's a way between now and then, and I'm like literally just bullet points. That's it. You know, things change so much, right? And it's hard to track where it is latest. If you could just send all the commissioners an email that's like this change, that change, you just really high level, because we're out and about and people ask us, and we might be thinking of an old version of this versus the current.
Madam Chair, we usually try to do a one-page wrap-up after a legislative session, and particularly for this one, I think that's appropriate, and we'll plan to have that on our work plan early on.
Nothing in between?
We don't know anything until the gavel comes down, so I think it would be premature to say this is how it's shaping up. We can let you know what happened pretty quickly after the gavel comes down.
Yeah, we'll certainly have the legislative report completed well before the commission meeting in April.
The only reason I was bringing this up is because it changed so much, you know, last time with like one time versus other. And if you were like, I support or don't support, suddenly it was a different thing, you know? So I think it's different. It's a short session, but it's normally why I just wait. Thank you. Deputy Director Green.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and Director. It's not on. Thank you. I have been receiving a number of sort of emails on the subject of late. Yesterday, they started coming in. So I'm a bit concerned that the commission might start to receive some emails about this bill, and some of the comments have misrepresented our agency position on the bill in that we have one. I don't believe we have one. So if you could direct that sort of guidance to us again, I'm just planning to not respond, frankly, until I talk to the director about how to respond to these. But we have an official sort of non-position, so I think that would extend to the commission as well. It's just too fast moving, and the governor's in charge. But Palmer, please, if you could. Alexis.
Yeah, I can share that just without governor's office authority, we do not take positions on bills.
Good to know. Don't remind us. Director Bateman, I don't. Yep.
On legislative matters? Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm starting to see the room fill up, and I'm very aware of the time. So I'll take a few moments here to just wrap up a director's report and start and continue to hit the highlights. One of the pieces that we wanted to pull out and bring to your attention this morning was the governor's expectations. That's at the bottom of page 3 on your staff report. And we've been bringing this matrix or this table to you in the last few meetings to show you where we are as an agency in fulfilling the governor's expectations. Oh, maybe my page numbers are different. Anyway, there's a handy table in your director's staff report that talks about governor's expectations. There it is. And so as you'll recall, when the governor took office back back a year ago now, almost immediately, she sent a letter around to agency heads saying, these are some things that I'd like to see from you in terms of getting some comfort around what you're thinking about, how you're going about your business. And there were 11 reports that she required of agencies. They're listed there. And all through this past calendar year, we've been ticking through those and making sure that we were aligned with our expectations. Many of these things were already underway. As you'll recall, our strategic plan was well underway, and it gave us a really good footing compared to some of our agency partners. But the last few that are on this table, we wrapped up at the end of 2023. And I just wanted to let you know they're now out and faring quite well. One in particular is our IT strategic plan, which we turned in. And when we wrote this report, we did not yet know that we had been approved by the Office of the State CIO. So that IT strategic plan has been approved. We're very excited about it. It's attached in the back of this report for you to look at. And you'll see that it covers a number of things, from our philosophy and how we're going to approach IT and the use of technology, to a little blurb about our IT maturity. This all goes towards the previous conversation we just had about growing, and the fact that we're growing at a rate and with a number of responsibilities that means we need to go about doing our IT work differently than we did in the past. I keep telling folks we need to stop behaving like we're just a mom and pop business, and we need to get some systems in place, some real organization, so that as folks join us as staff, they intuitively know where to find files, how to jump in, and how to do their work without asking, where is this found? Where is this located? We need to build some systems that actually make sense for folks who are arriving and folks who are already here. So this IT strategic plan also includes a number of projects that we know we need to undertake over the next several years. Everything from a records management system to a grants management system to updating how we keep records. And so I just wanted to point out a couple of things. They're sprinkled throughout this report and also noted at the back. But one major effort that we're engaged in right now is digitizing our acknowledgement room. So if you've ever been to our office and you've walked back by that that big library of original records that we keep on behalf of all 241 cities, incorporated cities in Oregon, and all 36 counties, we have their original records of comprehensive plans and PAPAs. And Cindy, who's here and helping us staff today, is actually the project manager, and we've brought in a consultant with big scanners and lots of equipment to get that room digitized and safe. And so that's something that will take the next several months, but we're very excited about that. And it just represents the first step in a lot of work that we'll need to do over the next several years. It's all laid out in this plan that's been accepted. And then the other plan that I wanted to bring to your attention is one about succession planning. And you can tell from this morning's discussion about new arrivals, departures, promotions, retirements, that the idea of succession planning is going to be very important here to us and then in the future. And it involves everything from making sure we have training in place to making sure we have a deep bench and some, ability to back each other up, to cross-train, to document, so that the next person that arrives can look things up and know where they're kept. And again, kudos to Taylor Sorgenfree in the back of the room, who spearheaded the succession planning piece of this for us, and was really good at getting the attention of managers and making sure that they had identified who are your key positions and key roles that they are playing that we need to make sure we understand and have a plan for, so that we can always be moving forward. We're very excited about our ability to deliver on this list of reports and governor's expectations. I think we had quite a good showing for an agency of 75 people. Let's see. And so that's all we want to say on expectations. Oh no, there's the other piece too, that first row on the DEI plan. You may recall we embedded the DEI plan in our strategic plan, and we've had good response to that as well. And we'll actually be meeting with Department of Administrative Services and their Office of Cultural Change coming up here in the next couple of weeks. They are kind of hosting forums and discussions for all of the agencies to give them feedback on what they saw in that plan, and how we might do things differently, or what we might consider as we move forward into the future. So those conversations are active and ongoing. And again, we're we're, I think, faring well compared to many of our agency partners. I'm happy to take questions on governor's expectations.
Commissioner Boyer.
I have a quick comment. Overseeing several different state agencies, I'm rarely impressed with this list of expectations and where they're at. So not everybody is that far ahead. So thank you.
That comes from being an agency of planners, actually. We were well positioned when this list came out.
Any other commissioners? I was gonna say, I know I've been talking internally, but I thought I'd voice it to the commission, about just grants in general. I've had the pleasure of applying for, grants from different departments within the state. And, I guess there's some things I've seen that I just really hope our department isn't doing. And so just thinking about like, how does the public interface, just streamlining, making it easy, not be repetitive, not have different formats for different things, just really looking at the ease and user friendliness. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers between the the private sector and government is literally money exists, but people can't, take special expertise. And I think that really goes to our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, really about who can participate in getting money from government or not. And so, yeah, that's something that I've talked about, but it really, at the end of the day, goes with IT, right? And systems and ability to upload and all that stuff. But it'd be great to somehow get feedback, like somebody do a trial run or something about like, if I was applying for a grant, like what would that all involve to get that? Because I feel like that feedback loop doesn't usually happen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're exactly right. Part of this entire discussion is about the customer experience and the interaction with the agency. I think we've been very fortunate up until now, but we are now growing at a pace where we could easily find ourselves in a situation where different programs are handling things differently, and that doesn't look good or feel good to our customers. So I think we're right at the cusp of asking the right questions and getting our footing, but it's a caution that we appreciate.
But I agree with Commissioner Boyer that this is like amazing stuff. This is like the best stuff, in my opinion, because it just makes all the work easier for everybody. So it has an economy of scale to it. Once everybody knows the system and it works well, then people can do their job, their actual specific technical jobs more easier.
Just a couple more items. As you'll see in the report, we continue to celebrate the 50th anniversary of our land use planning system. And so shout out to Sadie Kearney, our communications manager. There's a piece in here and some photos of the 50th anniversary exhibit that we had going at the Oregon Historic Society. It was seemed like awfully short amount of time, but we were fortunate enough to be able to grab a few pictures and get some feedback from folks who went through that exhibit. And much of what was in here was a duplicate of the pieces that we used when we had the 50th anniversary celebration out on the Capitol Mall. So many of the posters and quotes and photos that were up would be familiar to you. So that was great that they reached out and gave us that exposure and opportunity to participate there. The rest of the report really focuses, as you were saying just now, Chair, on our grants experience, either grants that we have recently given out to our partners or ones that are upcoming that represent some opportunities. So we would invite folks to study this a little bit and kind of see where they might fit in and where there might be opportunities for funding coming to a community near you. Let's see, the last piece that I wanted to note was around our housing work, and just double checking here. I think we have a couple of moments if Ethan's interested in joining us. We recently launched a very large rulemaking with which some of you are quite familiar. So I wondered if you wanted to say just a few words about that, as well as some other things in this section of the report. The Governor's Housing Production Advisory Council has recently wrapped up their work, and there's a lot going on. So Ethan, I've got a few minutes for you if you want to just give us some updates.
Thank you, Director Bateman. Commission, my name is Ethan Stuckmeyer. I'm the manager of the Housing Division at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Yeah, so we are in a little bit of a break period for the Rulemaking Advisory Committee and the Technical Advisory Committee process to implement HB 2001 from the 2023 session. That break has given us some time to prepare for the next 15, 18 months of this work. in a way that has been incredibly helpful, I think, for our staff, for our project team, to just be prepared for what is ultimately a very short amount of time to conduct some rulemaking on a major reform to a system that hasn't been substantially reformed in 50 years. We'll start up again with the rulemaking and technical advisory committee process in March, and we're preparing for scheduling of those meetings. But really, I think the staff time at this current moment has been preparing for what are the major questions that need to be answered in the rulemaking process throughout the next several months, and what are the sub questions within there, within those major questions. But then how does the technical advisory committee process work within the rulemaking advisory committee process? What questions does the rulemaking advisory committee need to, or direction do they need to provide to the technical advisory committees to actually advance that work in a kind of sequential and in a way that makes a lot of sense? So we've been preparing for that and having some really good discussions about housing policy generally, and how does this fit within the commission's framework for equitable decision making, and keeping that kind of paramount in the process. Also in December and in the beginning of January, I can actually remember the date of the last meeting of the Housing Production Advisory Council. That process is now concluded. They've had their final meeting, and I think it was 59 recommendations that the Housing Production Advisory Committee Council, has submitted to the governor for consideration to remove barriers to housing production. Those range from a very wide spectrum of recommendations, from things related to wetlands, things related to the urban growth boundary, things about educating trades and skilled trades, and a million other things, or I guess 50 other things in between. But that process, as you heard from the legislative staff, has been incorporated into some of the legislative concepts in consideration in 2024, but also I think even more of those recommendations will either be worked on at an executive branch level, where we get direction as state agencies from the governor's office to do certain things on that list, or for consideration in the policy agenda for 2025 session and beyond. So that process has come to a close at this point in time, and we're waiting for kind of next steps from the governor's office and the legislature on that front.
Commissioners? Commissioner Laza?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to chime in as the commission liaison to the housing rulemaking. I just wanted to, Ethan, I think what you said about your team defining the set of questions that need to be answered through this rulemaking is really critical to how we proceed through this. I'll remind my commission colleagues that this is follow-on work to some major processes that have been in play for a year and a half now. And so I think we need to, I'll continue to remind us that that's what we're doing here in this rulemaking. We are answering some specific questions about how we move this work forward. Because there's a lot of noise out there right now about the big steps that we've taken in the last couple of years, from community-friendly equitable communities to the initial parts of ONA to where we are today. And so it's going to be critical for us. And the reason that it becomes so critical is because of the timeline. Ethan mentioned the 15 to 18-month timeline, but that timeline is for them to implement this work. We're talking about, from our perspective, a really compressed timeline to move the rules through. These RACs and TACs aren't meeting again until March. In our meeting cadence, that means that we'll meet in April, and then July, and then November. And I think we added a housing meeting in there in October, right? So as the RACs and TACs are working in parallel, we're going to have stuff coming to us, and Ethan's team is going to be bringing stuff to us at a pretty quick pace over the next now 9 to 10 months. So just a little preview of what's to come, upcoming features.
Chair, if I may, can I kind of extrapolate on that too, and just kind of point some milestones out for this commission? So the first set of rules related to the the housing production process, the housing planning process envisioned under HB 2001, including how do we integrate affirmatively furthering fair housing into the housing process? What does it mean to plan for needed housing? That set of rules and rules related to accountability in that process and how cities are, what the expectation is for local governments in doing that planning. Those batch of rules are scheduled to be adopted by January 1st, 2025. So what that means is that we'll be coming in front of commission in November to have the first public hearing on those rules and adoption in early December, I believe, if I have my calendar correctly. But that means that, you know, backing up with the Secretary of State notice, that means that we have to publish those rules by October 1st of this year, which means our pencils are down in September. So we'll have lots of meetings between now and then with the folks on the advisory committees, and a lot of the best we can touch points with you all on that process. So there's no surprises for you all as we're going into those public hearings and keeping you up to date on the major policy alternatives and options that we see through that process.
I was thinking like after the HAPO happens or that doesn't happen, it'd be great to see an updated like diagram that shows all of these committees. I don't even know what they're all called. There's so many, right? And which ones are temporary, and maybe there's like a dash line around it, like it was, but it's now gone away. This one's staying, this one's, and how they all, you know, which ones are governor led versus there's some other ones that are not about the governor, they're about legislator, you know, because they all sound very similar. And so it'd be great to get a map, just like a visual on that. Because then I always bring it back to how does all that you mentioned feed into our housing production strategies database that I'm really keen on. Because all the different groups that I've heard, they're all like, it's almost like they're starting from scratch, like blank sheet of paper, housing production strategies. And granted, that's already been done, right? And so I'm always like, okay, if they're going to do independent work, how do we bring that, or how do we decide what work comes back into our database?
Yeah, Chair, it's a good point, and I'm envisioning this table to end all tables, or mind map of kind of articulating what that all looks like and what the state of play is. I think you'll hear a little bit later in the agenda today about how that's beginning to kind of fit and nestle together. You know, incorporating the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis Program into things like the Housing Capacity Analysis Program and the Housing Production Strategy Program. HB 2001 from the 2023 session set the stage for that, and we're just arranging the chairs a little bit with your help today. So, yeah.
And it goes back to that public visibility, transparency, and also as a resource, right? It's like if you say this is the place where all the stuff is going to eventually reside, it doesn't get lost in the, like, you know, plans on a shelf type feeling. Director Bateman.
Thank you, Ethan. I wanted to thank Ethan and his housing team, as well as our policy and legislative folks, for getting all of this teed up, corralled, and served up to us at this point in the process. To conclude today, I just wanted to conclude with an invitation and an invitation for suggestions. You've asked me to stay in touch as much as possible with our external partners and continue my meet and greets, continuing to meet folks, even though I've been in the chair now for more than 18 months. And so continue to work with our organizations and associations that are out there, as well as, you know, our local government partners and our tribal partners. Recently have been meeting with either executive staff or chairs of boards with groups such as the Farm Bureau, the Water Resources Congress, which is the irrigation districts, Association of Oregon Counties, League of Oregon Cities, legislators, and then of course state and city partners as well. And state and federal agencies as well. So I just wanted to extend an invitation to all of you, as well as to our guests in the room and folks who are listening online. If there's a group that you feel like I need to meet with and I have not yet, and that I need to get to know, who needs to get to know me, I would love that opportunity. I just want to make sure that now one generation, two generations past when this program was established, that folks continue to understand who we are, what we're doing, why we're here, what the value is. And I know there's a lot of education and continued relationship building. I'm interested in that and would happy to take your suggestions either now or in looking at the clock. If anything you want to send along to me would be welcomed as well.
And then I think this item had ability for public testimony, but I've heard that there isn't anybody signed up, so it's just verifying. Thank you. So with that, yes, thank you. Yes. Yes, we're going to take a 5-minute break and we'll be back at 10. Welcome back to the January 25th LCDC meeting. We will now have agenda item number 4, which is rulemaking adoption of exception criteria for navigation channel modification in Coos Bay with Meg Reed, Coastal Policy Specialist, and Ocean and Coastal Division Manager Lisa Phipps. Meg will lead the presentation. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you. Sure. I'll just kick it off. My name's Lisa Phipps, for the record, the manager of the Ocean and Coastal Services Division and the Oregon Coastal Management Program. And we're here today to talk about the rulemaking for the adoption of exception criteria for navigation channel modifications in Coos Bay. I'm here purely as support for Meg if any questions come up from a higher level. So I'm going to pass it off to her to lead the rest of this conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Chair Halova, Vice Chair Lelak, and members of the commission. I'm Meg Reed, the Coastal Policy Specialist for DLCD. So I'm here to talk about what we are calling a conforming rulemaking. So this is to reflect changes that were passed in statute in the 2023 legislative session. And we are putting it in our rules to kind of have all the rules for goal exceptions in the same place in our rules. So I'm going to kind of talk through a little bit of background first. This particular goal exception is related to Goal 16, which is estuarine resources. So I'll talk a little bit of background about that goal and its requirements, and then talk about the legislative session that occurred with the passage of House Bill 3382. Then I'll go into the proposed rule language and sort of what the rule talks about. I'll then talk about the public comments that we have received, and then move into the public testimony that we have here today and ask for your action to consider the adoption of these rules into Division 4. So to start, just a little bit of context setting, the last 4 of our statewide planning goals are the coastal goals. So this is a graphic to kind of share the geographic nature of these goals. They are pretty geographically specific. So goal 16 is estuarine resources, and that is really the waters of the estuary. Goal 17 is coastal shorelands, which is the lands adjacent to the estuary, as well as the lands adjacent to coastal lakes and the ocean shore. Then goal 18 is beaches and dunes, and that's the sandy areas of the ocean shore. And then goal 19, which is ocean resources. And that is really the only goal that is implemented solely by the state and not by local governments. So I'll talk more about goal 16 itself. So the goal requires the development of estuary management plans for any jurisdiction that has estuaries within them. And those are just part of comprehensive plans, but they are really delving into the water. So it's just like land use zoning, but it's in the water. And the goal sets out an overall classification of every one of Oregon's estuaries. We have 22 major estuaries and 17 minor estuaries. And there's only 3 types, and there's sort of subtypes to one of them. So we have natural estuaries, conservation estuaries, and development estuaries. And development can be shallow draft or deep draft development. So for development estuaries, that's all the estuaries that have jetties at their mouths and have a navigation channel. And that for shallow draft, it's a navigation channel that's 22 feet or shallower. And for deep draft, it's 22 feet or deeper. And there are only 3 deep draft development estuaries in Oregon. There is Coos Bay, Yaquina Bay, and the Columbia River. Then we have quite a few shallow draft, and again, that's all the ones that have jetties. And then conservation are those that have sort of minimal development around the shore and significant biological resources, but the natural estuaries are the ones that have the most significant natural resources and the least amount of development around the shoreline. From there, there's the overall management classification, and then there are management unit types that have to be put onto the waterscape. And those, again, can only be those 3 types: development, development, conservation, and natural. And they're bounded, they're discrete geographic units on the water. And they're kind of like similar, but the goal is pretty prescriptive about what uses and activities are allowed in each of those zones. So natural, again, is the most protective of the biological resources, and the least amount of uses are allowed in that. It's mostly just recreation and low intensity research. Whereas conservation is sort of a mixed approach, and then development is where you have like port facilities, boat ramps, marinas, any sort of infrastructure, and then all of the federal navigation channels are development management units. So those are really how the overall estuary is zoned. And then there are further permit processes that kind of work to talk about how development is actually then allowed or not allowed in those areas. So now I'm going to focus just on Coos Bay, because this is where this piece of legislation is directed. It is only applicable in the Coos Bay estuary, which again is one of 3 deep draft development estuaries. And I have this circle up here to kind of show kind of where this came from. So there is a potential shipping container facility that's proposed for this estuary. And as I mentioned before, the geographic boundaries of the management units kind of dictate what activities are allowed or not allowed in those. And dredging is one of those activities that is the most regulated. And that's typically really, especially for navigation purposes, dredging is only allowed in development management unit estuaries. And that is the really dark blue on the screen. And the lightest blue is the natural management units. And so you can see in some instances, there are natural management units that are directly adjacent to development management units. And that's likely because, and in particular in this area, that there is eelgrass beds present there or other significant biological resources, which is why they're determined to be that way, and why they have those kinds of uses and activities regulated. But in this particular instance, there is there's proposals to widen and deepen the navigation channel to allow for larger vessels to come into this estuary. And then the sort of infrastructure that goes along with that to have turning basins and channels that go to shore and things like that have to be associated with larger facilities. So again, this goal 16 is really all about that balancing. Like all of our work really is about protecting natural resources as well as allowing for economic development. Estuaries, as probably all of you know, are extremely important for all sorts of reasons. They are very ecologically rich areas, and they have very important social, cultural, and economic purposes as well. So now I'm going to go into House Bill 3382, which was known as the Ports Bill, that was passed in the 2023 legislative session. When the bill was first introduced, it was a much broader bill and had sort of exemptions to all of land use. But over the session, it was modified quite a few times to be much more narrow. And by the time it was passed, it was just reflecting a specific reason exception process for Goal 16 for the purpose of deep draft navigation channel improvements. The language of the bill does include a definition for what those improvements are. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really about widening and deepening the navigation channel, but also the kind of side channels and turning basins and things that are associated with that. But it does exclude dredge material disposal. That is another activity that is highly regulated by estuary management plans and coastal shoreline plans. And so that is accepted from this exception. And so those would still be, dredge material disposal would still be regulated by the estuary management plan. So this is adding a new specific reason exception. For applicants, it can only be the International Port of Coos Bay or a tribe. It doesn't change any existing processes. So this is still a local land use decision that is made by the local jurisdictions implementing the estuary management plan. And then there are quite a number of permits that are still required for this kind of activity, dredging and the associated activities that are related to that. Also in the language, it does require the applicant to mitigate for adverse impacts. This is essentially just referencing the mitigation policy that's already in the state and required for applicants for removal fill permits from the Department of State Lands. The applicant also must identify financing sources for the project and the number of jobs created. And they have to avoid or mitigate for archaeological sites that are discovered. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of existing processes in the estuaries. So in addition to just the zoning of whether or not an activity or use is allowed in the estuary, then through the local planning department, there's usually a floodplain development permit that's also required because the estuaries are in the floodplain. There are also state and federal permits required, such as the Department of State Lands and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Joint Removal Fill Permit. There's also Department of Environmental Quality 401 certification for water quality. The Department of Fish and Wildlife doesn't have its own permit, but they consult on the mitigation for the removal fill permit. The Department of Agriculture has permits related to aquaculture, if that's involved. The State Historic Preservation Office will also have a role. And this Department of State Lands also has another role with leasing of the bottom of submerged and submersible lands that are within the state. And then our department has a role sort of towards the end with any federal action or federal permit that's proposed in the coastal zone. We have something called federal consistency review, where we can apply the state's enforceable policies, which include local land use policies, to the final decision to ensure that the state's policies are being met by a federal applicant or a federal permit. And then there is also, of course, the tribal consultation and comments that are also through the federal permit process. So why are we here today? This language was put directly into the statute. It was directed to be put in ORS 197. And all of our other goal exception criteria are in rule and for goal 2 rules. And that's chapter 660 division 2. And so this is a conforming sort of housekeeping division 4, sorry. I saw Steve's face and I knew I did that wrong. Division 4. And this is to put the language of the goal exception into that rule. And I have it wrong on my slide. So, or no, it says goal 2. That's right. Goal 2, division 4. But something to note is that the bill, when it was passed, it became effective upon passage. It had an emergency clause in it, so it's already in effect. And this would just be to kind of make sure that all the goal criteria are in the same location. So that was where the rule language was put in your in the staff report. The attachment is where the language would be put, and it's a reference to the statute and not actually a repetition of the language. One of the reasons we did that was because there is a definition in the proposed statute rule on deep draft navigation improvements, and if we just did the language in the rule, we would have to put them in different places. So this just made it a little bit of a cleaner approach, is to just reference the statute. We did have a geographic hearing this week in Coos Bay, and we have geographic hearings anytime a rule affects just one location of the state and is not applicable statewide. So because this rule is only for the Coos Bay estuary, we had the geographic hearing. We had about 10 people attend the public hearing and give testimony. Generally, the testimony we have received to date is in opposition to the language. And there have been several requests of our agency to conduct further rulemaking to further clarify some of the terms and criteria that are in the language. And I believe that there will be several people testifying again today. So I think that's it for me, and I'll turn it back to you, Chair.
Thank you. For some reason, I just started coughing. So I think I'm going to go outside and cough for a little bit. I don't know why. So I want to turn it over, sorry, for a second, to the vice chair, and I'll be back in a second. Sorry about that.
Thank you. You want to open it up for questions for commissioners prior to conducting this public hearing? Commissioner Warren, just to follow up on one of the public comments, is there any reason that we would continue rulemaking for this item? Can you see any benefits to this process for entering into rulemaking?
Vice Chair Lilac and Commissioner Warren, thank you for the question. I think there's a possibility that there is some vague language in the bill and there could be further clarification. But I also think that some of what commenters have asked for is outside of the intent of the rule and outside of what we would legally be allowed to do through rulemaking. So given other priorities and things of that nature, I'm not sure what the benefit would be to do further rulemaking, but I think doing the conforming rulemaking today does not preclude us from doing that further rulemaking in the future. There also, I guess one more thing I wanted to add is that the goal exception criteria is already in effect through the statute. If there was an application to come in, which we sort of anticipate something will be coming in soon, if we were to do rulemaking, it's unlikely the time it would take to do rulemaking would be sufficient for when an application for a goal exception would come in. Because as you know, that if it comes in now, they would be subject to the rules now. We wouldn't be able to retroactively apply the rules later. Thank you.
Commissioner Lazo.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lilac. Thanks, Meg and Lisa. I have a question about one of the comments that were received by the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Silesia Indians. It doesn't look like they were part, or maybe correct me if I'm wrong, that they were part of the geographic hearing. And so I'm not sure if their public comment didn't specifically address the concerns they had. They just said they would like to be consulted and we have concerns. Do you know if their concerns have been addressed?
Yeah, Vice Chair Lilac and Commissioner Lazo, thank you for the question. We did actually have a staff level consultation with the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Silesia Indians on Monday. And we were able to talk through a lot of their concerns. So I think at the moment they feel that their questions and concerns have been addressed.
Yeah, Deputy Director. Thank you, Vice Chair Lilac, Commissioners. Kirsten Green, I'm Deputy Director. Thank you. And also serve as Tribal Liaison at Brenda's request. I just wanted to flag that just because we had staff to staff consultation does not mean that their concerns are addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, and that's really the gist of my inquiry is, in your mind as our expert staffers, could you assure me that you think there are adequate protections in place for the concerns that have been raised that are within the purview of this law, our administrative rule, that we can go forward so that there is monitoring, there will be enforcement, that we have some assurance that what's in place is adequate. That's all I'm looking for.
Yeah. Chair Halova, Vice Chair Lilac, and Commissioner Thompson, thank you for the question. I don't think I can make that assurance. Our role isn't necessarily as mitigation experts. Like I mentioned in the rule language, there is a provision to do mitigation that is already required through the permitting process. So how I see this actually working in practice is that a local government would receive this application from the port and they would address the mitigation. The decision makers would decide whether that was adequate or not. Then if it were to move forward and the applicant were then to go get a removal fill permit from the Department of State Lands, they would have to then address the mitigation again. And at that time, the Department of Fish and Wildlife would be much more involved and they would be able to address the mitigation again and whether or not it was adequate. And if they believe that it's not adequate, they could deny the permit or work with the applicant to further do more mitigation. There is a hierarchy of mitigation that's in the standard. So there's, avoid the action altogether, and then mitigate for it or minimize the impact, and then all the way down to compensate, which is when you impact and have to sort of pay for mitigation elsewhere generally. So there is sort of that hierarchy that they would have to go through. The other thing that I didn't mention before is that when you get a reason exception from a local government, there is a 4-part test that is in our rules in Division 4. And the reason, which is what this is, the reason to get the exception, is the first of the 4-part test. So there are 3 other tests that have to be met. And the 4th one is about how compatible the use is with adjacent uses. And I think that's actually where a lot of that question that you're talking about of the adverse impacts and how they will be avoided or mitigated for would really have to come through in the application for the local goal exception. I don't know if that assures you, but that is the process.
Vice Chair Lilac.
Thank you. Just to take that question just a bit further, and I'll frame it as a question because we're not in deliberations. As I read now the law, the standard is carried out in a manner that includes mitigation, and it continues on to ensure no net loss of estuarine resources in the affected aquatic and shore area. It keeps going on. So the no net loss standard, unless I'm misunderstanding, that's a really high bar, and I've seen that no net loss standard addressing other natural resources and a lot of other land use applications as a former community development director for a county. So I understand that to be a very high bar. Is that an accurate understanding?
Wait. No, I was listening. Lisa Phipps, manager for the Oregon Coastal Management Program. Vice Chair Lilac, I appreciate that question. The difference between no net loss on land and no net loss in the waters, the water has a confined geography. You don't make more water space. And so it is actually a very high bar within the estuary. And it would require, for example, if intrusion into estuary natural were to take place, which is what would probably trigger this goal exception process, is that somewhere else within that estuary, they would need to identify sites that either are estuary natural and can be further enhanced, or are currently, say, estuary conservation that with some mitigation could become estuary natural areas. It's challenging, which is what you'll hear from our public comment today, I'm sure. But it can be done. But yes, it definitely sets a high bar. And this exception process is not a, for lack of a more technical term, it is not a gimme. There are a lot of steps that need to be addressed in order to be able to pass this kind of exceptions process.
I think we were going to go to public comment. One more question before that. Commissioner Warren.
Maybe this is a better question suited for Steve, but because this has to go through a local process for approval, then there will be opportunity for additional appeal from community members, concerned people, right? That then could elevate this to another level, right? Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, Commissioner Warren, that is correct. Yeah.
So public testimony. So we're taking people, I have a list here and I was going to call your name. I think we're redoing bring three people can come up at the same time and then we can go through your testimony. I think we have online the first one, or yeah, Representative Gomberg is online. Let me just say Senator Brock Smith and Brian Clem and Annie Merrill could come to the, oh, that's virtual, sorry. Yeah, just those two come to the front. Thank you. And so we'll go with Representative Gomberg first.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'm glad you're feeling a little bit better. And good morning to you, commissioners. For your record, I am David Gomberg, State Representative for House District 10 on the Central Coast and Chair of the Legislative Coastal Caucus. And I'm here today to share with you a little bit of background on the intent of House Bill 3382 that was the impetus behind the rule adoption the Commission is hearing today. So at the risk of being just a little bit redundant, let me say that when first introduced, House Bill 3382 authorized all deep water ports on our coastline and the Columbia to construct and expand navigation channels without local government review or demonstrating compliance with state or local land use law. Opponents of the bill were outraged, and justifiably so, because it was a terrible bill. However, those early conversations identified a very real problem. We were dealing with two LUBA decisions that impacted our port's ability to modify navigation channels. The base bill was terrible, but there was an opportunity to turn it into something productive. So in early March 2023, the entire Coastal Caucus showed up to a joint transportation committee to support the concept, and then we went to work. We focused on the Port of Coos Bay and crafted amendments in consultation with a number of agencies, tribal communities, and the governor's team, as well as the conservation community, to narrow but provide a clear pathway to begin work modernizing our navigation channels. After months of negotiation, we finally landed on a bill that I was pleased to support. It reduced the scope from all of our deep water ports to only the Port of Coos Bay. The measure only applies to limited portions of the estuary within the port jurisdiction, and it required full mitigation to ensure no net loss of resources. As amended, this bill provided improved participation by our tribes, and the measure included specific language that fossil fuel companies are not able to utilize this process. And most important, the bill requires public review like any other permit for work in our deep water ports. In summary, the bill created a clear public process for the Port of Coos Bay or our 9 federally recognized tribes to apply for a Grant 16 exception. This measure does not automatically greenlight dredging, and it does not fast-track development. The bill passed in the House 53-3, in the Senate 21-4. This was clearly a broadly supported, bipartisan, bicameral process. Now, I don't fault anybody for having apprehensions about the measure or the rulemaking before you today. This is all complicated stuff, but I do want to make clear that through a series of amendments, we came a long, long way from where we started. And I think that we've got a reasonable process for protecting our natural environment, as well as providing opportunities for meaningful growth in a part of Oregon that really needs our help. This was an effort by the legislature to craft a measure that leaves intact opportunity for public review and input, local control, environmental oversight, and it bears repeating, no net loss of mitigation standards of our estuarine resources. And I see I'm out of time, so I thank you for sharing that with me.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. We're going to go on to Senator Brock Smith and then Brian Clem.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. For your record, I'm State Senator David Brock Smith for Senate District 1, and just a little, I won't take up all my time. As Representative Gomberg and the Chair of the Coastal Caucus did an excellent job in outlining what 3382 did. Just a little background on the Coastal Caucus, however. So the Oregon Legislative Coastal Caucus is the elected senators and state representatives whose districts make up the Oregon coast. It is a bicameral, bipartisan group of legislators that has really the coastal jurisdictions at heart, because we, of course, understand more of our coastal resources and needs than most of the folks that legislate out of Baker County or Grant County or Walla County, right? And so, I will just add, and I appreciate the great description that was and overview that was taken care of earlier. It really, and as Representative said, this piece of legislation was heavily negotiated with all stakeholders at the table through the legislative process. I appreciate the rulemaking. I appreciate your work, and I appreciate the suggested rules that you're moving forward potentially today, and directing that language back to that heavily negotiated piece of legislation is critically important. I have seen, unfortunately, not by this commission, but other commissions where other agencies actually, when you get into rulemaking, that the legislative intent is actually lost in that rulemaking, and it's rather unfortunate. And my colleagues and I have discussed actually drafting legislation that would redirect any rulemaking to actually come back to the legislative body for approval because of it in some instances. But I do want to touch on, as a former city council or council president, chamber director, county planning commissioner, county commissioner, before being a state representative, I am a local government guy. And this legislation and the rule and the rules that are proposed to be adopted clearly outlines, and as it was stated before, that there is a lot of process. This is not a green light. And more importantly, there's a lot of process to come back and consult with the tribal governments for a plan to move forward, and ultimately the local government, and they are the final authority in moving anything forward. So again, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for the work that you do for Oregon. I know it's not easy, and I'm grateful.
Thank you for your testimony. Brian Clem, which you're a former representative.
That's fine. Brian's good. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the commission, first of all, Brian Clem, great to see some of you again. I call it pleasure. I think actually it was punishment of being assigned to land use committees all 15.11 years I served. Chaired it probably, 12 or 13 out of the 15 years. I thought I was done with the capital and land use when I retired in December 21. So here I am, and I was back at the Capitol heavily negotiating this bill. And the reason is I'm one of the owners of a thing called the Pacific Coast Intermodal Port. This is my hometown. I was born and raised here, and somebody called me right after I got out of office and talked me into this. I'm not compensated. I'm not paid. This is my investment in this community. And it is extremely important to me because I grew up here. My dad moved here as a kid, and the high school was 2,000 plus students when he went there. It was 1,400 when I was here. It's now 750. Between 8 and 10 elementary schools closed here. My niece and nephew both left this summer to go to college. My brother's here. He doesn't think there'll be a job for them here anymore. So I'm passionate about this project of this Pacific Coast Intermodal Port because this is where I'm from, and I watched what happened. My own mom laid off 4 times during these years. So it's been a difficult run. Actually, things look better than they did for a while. It was tough for me to come here. Things look better, but we are trying to, with our project, create several thousand jobs, at least 2,500 here directly in Coos Bay working at the port. But our estimates between here and Eugene of around 6,000 that work on our project and about 10,000 total jobs created from our project, all electric, using no trucks, all trains to move containers that will help decarbonize the supply chain. So that's why you see this bill. There's a project that a lot of people want to see happen. And we came to the conclusion after looking at the Luba ruling, we could not do our project without legislation. Otherwise, there's no way I would have been back in the Capitol. So having said that, let me just hit a couple points, and I'll be around if you want to talk more about it. I'm unfortunately a wonky geek on this stuff. This port is already set under state policy, as you heard, as a deep draft development port. Everything else that's natural, that is limited draft, they don't have jetties. This is the one the state chose in the 70s to do this kind of activity in. And like it or not, that's state law, that's state policy. And so we have a debate about what happens within then a already designated port. What we're going to eventually get into is specific estuary management units. And should you change 1 or 2 or 3 to allow for a project? That's going to be a city council, county commission decision. And that's what the exceptions process is. I didn't want to go down that road initially. The governor's office asked if we could, we agreed. And that no net loss standard is very high. And my lawyer told me exactly how much more we're going to pay. And we're fine with it because this project needs to be done by the book according to all our existing processes. So I would encourage you to look more into it. There's some comments that I saw. I wouldn't change a bunch of new law and new processes by adding rules that redirect and set new standards. I would, if I were you, I would listen to the staff recommendation, let the city council add standards, let the county commission add standards, let them add layers. We're not opposed to more compromise on, for example, mitigation, a higher ratio, but let the local governments do that, given this is a goal exception and that's supposed to be done by local governments. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And so we're going to have Annie Merrill from the Oregon Shore Conservation Coalition. She's going to testify virtually. But I'd like to bring up the following 3 people to the front. Dr. Catherine Music, who's representing herself, Mike Graybill, representing self, and Jane Potter, representing self, to the front. Let's start off with, and I failed to say this at the beginning, sorry. Everyone has 3 minutes to testify, and there's a clock on the screen here.
Before we begin, I would just express my concern at the 3-minute notice because we weren't given that time limit in advance. And so I've prepared a statement, a written statement, and it will not be adequate for a 3-minute timeline. And I feel somewhat, I spent a day or so ahead preparing written comments.
Yeah,
Now
so
we've got a 3-minute deadline for a presentation that I tried to keep to limits, which is why I handed you a written summary so that you could follow along and see that I'm not going to go on forever, but I'll probably go on longer than 3 minutes.
Yeah. So I think out of the interest of fairness to everyone who's testified now and will, we have to keep to our agenda. And I'm sorry that if it was not communicated, we sort of, when we see how many people come in front of us, we actually have the discretion to go to like 2 minutes and 1 minute. And so I actually kept it at 3 minutes, which is usually kind of on our longer side, but we have the ability to accept written comment, and we will be able to get that. So in the interest of fairness, it would be good to keep to 3 minutes, and we will get your whole testimony. So I want to go virtually with Annie Merrill, who's online.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you, members of the commission, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Annie Merrill. I am the Ocean and Estuaries Manager, speaking on behalf of Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition. And we are a nonprofit organization whose address is in Coos Bay. And we've also submitted written comments to the commission to support this verbal testimony. Our understanding is that this is a conforming rulemaking intended to adopt the language of House Bill 3382 verbatim without interpretation from the agency. However, there are many gaps in definitions and unclear elements of the law, which will lead to challenges in implementation by local governments without further guidance. As such, we highly recommend the LCDC initiate a full rulemaking to appropriately implement the statute. As the commission charged with carrying out Oregon's land use goals in planning statutes, it is within LCDC's delegated authority to adopt rules necessary to carry out the provisions of House Bill 3382, which amends ORS Chapter 197. Where terms are left undefined in a statute, the agency has the authority to adopt rules to define those terms. In this case, rulemaking by LCDC would serve to express the agency's interpretation of the newly created statutory reasons exception. Through a full rulemaking, we ask that the commission define mitigation to ensure no net loss of estuarine resources and affected aquatic and shore areas and habitats. While the law defines mitigation according to DSL's removal fill laws, it does not specify what no net loss means or how it will be applied. No net loss can refer to resource distribution or population, biological function, or physical structure, all of which have different ecological implications. Substantial uncertainty and dispute may also be avoided by clarifying this important language through rulemaking. We recommend the LCDC look to partner agency rules to define no net loss and ensure that mitigation will require compliance with recommendations or requirements from expert agencies, including reference or incorporation of ODFW's habitat mitigation rules. House Bill 3382 also includes a requirement that a deep dive navigational channel improvement must be supported by a report that sets forth the identification of anticipated financing sources and an estimate of the number of jobs that will be created as a result of these improvements. These provisions also justify a rulemaking process because it remains unclear the rationale for calculating such an estimate and the types of jobs that will qualify. So considering a reasons goal exception must demonstrate a good reason to justify an exception, it's imperative to clarify how this reason will be quantified and what criteria will be used to accept it. So we are strong supporters of the agency's mission and the land use planning program, and we really just wish to ensure that appropriate rulemaking process is employed for a statute that is sure to have significant impacts to the Coos Bay estuary and the community at large. So we hope you consider our recommendation to pursue a full rulemaking process on this matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony. On to Dr. Catherine Musick.
Thank you very much. I'm Catherine Music. I appreciate this opportunity to speak today. I'll keep it short and sweet. I too was unaware there was a 3-minute limit, but I will try to, if I am short enough, perhaps I can give some time to you. So I submitted this to Meg Reed and I'll read from it so I can be clear. I object to adoption of exception criteria for navigation channel modifications in Coos Bay without first a pause for further discussions for an exception under Goal 2. I urge a pause in order to meet these 2 criteria. 1, to receive input from the tribes, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Institute of Marine Biology, the Coos County League of Women Voters, the fishermen, the scholars, including scientists and other concerned citizens on the proposed modifications. And 2nd, to determine if the projected benefits to the local economy indeed outweigh the certain losses of natural resources, including life in our sloughs, river, bay, forests, shores, and sea. As a marine biologist for 50 years, I've traveled all over the world and I've been observing adverse impacts of human activities on land and sea to ocean life. May I remind you, everything is connected. I'm dismayed that, thank you, Meg Reed, it was a very good presentation, but we divide 16 estuary, 17, 18, 19 lakes, dunes, ocean. It's all one package. Widening and deepening will certainly have adverse impacts. And I appreciate that there's a high bar here, but this is very frightening to me. I'm old and I'm observing catastrophe after catastrophe all around the world. This is not Scranton. This is Coos Bay. Cape Arago has one of the last remaining primary forests left. We can't just keep demolishing everything around the world. There will be no life, including humans. We're affecting the whole biosphere of which we are a part. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you ask clarifying questions?
Yeah. Yes.
If I could, Doctor, and my sense is there are a coalition of folks here who have the same concerns. The folks you mentioned seem like they will be part of the processes that Meg outlined for additional permitting. And so I'm not sure what you're asking of us was related
I know
to
this is just about the language and the high bar, but I was shocked last summer when I went to a meeting, League of Women Voters. No one was in town, and our senator and our representative Al Hoyle came, and this is a law already. It seems to me this is quite rushed. I've only lived here 4 years, but I go to the beach every day with my dog to Baskendorf, and I see changes in the dunes, and I'm shocked that this is already passed as an emergency. We're not Philadelphia. We're not Scranton. This is one of the last places on earth where it's really beautiful. We have clean air. And it's a
Ma'am, there's
disturbance.
a long list of public process that's involved in this. So
That's a problem. I'm sure I'm out of line here. I didn't find that the process was clear, even the 3-minute limit. There are a lot of ways we need to learn to communicate in English and other languages, and we're not doing a very good job.
But I'm talking about the process that will come if this is passed. As it says, it's not a gimme. That there's some public process to accomplish the project they would like to. So, are you also telling us that is inadequate?
I think so, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. I think we have Mike Graybill next.
Welcome to Coos Bay area. My name is Michael Graybill, and I've been a resident of the Port District since 1975. Some who live here are aware that the moon's bringing us a series of good low tides this week. In between showers, I had a chance to walk the shore of the estuary at Fossil Point, just inside the bay near the mouth of the South Slough Inlet. The exposed mudstone bedrock of this formation is some of the only natural rocky shoreline in any of the estuaries in Oregon. The Fossil Point formation extends from the shoreline out to and under the bottom of the navigation channel. It's one of only 2 locations in all of Oregon's estuaries that host populations of rock drilling Pittock clams. Years ago, University of Oregon scientists documented that there were over 1,000 clams per cubic meter of this mudstone. So the rare and unique features of the biological community that lives inside the bedrock were recognized over 40 years when the Estuary Management Plan was adopted. The people in this community came to an agreement and appropriately determined that the protection for this unique habitat and the biological community that it supports was the best management option. DLCD concurred that this portion of the estuary that adjoined the navigation channel was best zoned natural and conservation. Shifting to the other side of the bay, you might not be aware that the land under consideration for the site of the proposed container terminal and at the heart of HB 3382 was zoned for development in 1984 using DLCD's reasons exemption process. It's one of 26 reasons that were adopted in the original plan. The reasons back then why the sand dunes on the North Spit were exempted from protection that they would have been afforded otherwise was that the North Spit was identified as a landing site for offshore mineral development that was under consideration at the time by the U.S. Minerals Management Service. Of course, the exemption was made long before anyone was aware that the North Spit's extreme vulnerability to soil liquefaction and inundation by a Cascadia subduction zone event. Although the deep sea minerals exploration reasons never materialized, the now questionable development designation for the North Spit properties has persisted. So HB 3382 provided a path for the port and the tribes to get special permission to obliterate habitats that have been recognized as irreplaceable for the last 40 years. Even though 3382 has a provision about mitigation, it's simply a definition. There is no guidance on how to judge the sufficiency of a plan that's submitted for review. There is simply no known mechanism to mitigate for the loss of the rock drilling clam habitat. Once it's blasted from the bedrock and dumped in the ocean, that habitat and the clams that lived inside it will be gone forever. There's no alternative location or technological means to replace it. HB 3382 is silent on how mitigation proposals will be judged. This is but one example to demonstrate that the language of HB 3382 does not have sufficient detail to guide a rational agency decision-making process. I've previously submitted written testimony with specific recommendations on decision criteria that should be incorporated into DLCD's rulemaking process. I won't repeat those comments here, other than to say that adopting rules simply by referencing this statute is wholly inadequate, and that moving forward with a staff recommendation without undertaking additional rulemaking is a disservice to this state and an abrogation of your duties as commissioners.
Thank you for your testimony. Jane Hodder.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Jan Hodder. I've lived in Coos Bay for 45 years. I'm a coastal ecologist. Welcome to Coos Bay, and thank you for the opportunity to comment. I am passionate about ensuring protection of the Coos Bay ecosystem and the human communities that depend on the health and resilience of the Coos Estuary. I participated in all legislative hearings that led to the adoption of HB 3382 as one of the 300 plus people who testified against the legislation. The Coos Estuary is the largest, most diverse biologically, despite its development designation, and complex in Oregon. Its biological production fuels the Dungeness crab fishing fleet, provides the base of the food web for numerous commercial fish species, and supports the largest oyster production in the state, and much more. A portion of it is zoned for the South Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve, which celebrates its 50th anniversary this year. Also located on the shore of the estuary is the University of Oregon's Institute of Marine Biology, which will celebrate its 100th anniversary this year. And while we're at it, we should acknowledge the city of Coos Bay will celebrate its 150th anniversary this year. Coos Bay was originally called Marshfield, a name that recognizes that 150 years ago, we were already undertaking significant alterations to the Coos Estuary by filling and dredging to make a city. We have never stopped filling and dredging, maybe slowed a little with the advent 50 years ago of Senate Bill 100 and the estuary management plans, but the Coos Estuary salt marshes are only a little over 10% of what they were when only tribal people lived on its shore. Of course, the Coos Estuary has a development designation, but that doesn't mean that all development is sanctioned. That is why we have ordinances, zoning, and rules to assist in making decisions in what type of development is appropriate. Rules are tools that can help local jurisdictions do their job more efficiently and with less uncertainty. They are meant to make broad, unclear language be more specific. Some sections of HB 3382 are rather loosely defined, meaning any applications for exceptions will place a considerable burden on the Coos County staff. We only have a part-time planning director. She has other assigned duties. I have submitted detailed comments regarding the jobs and financing sections in this bill, encouraging the Commission to undertake further rulemaking to provide local entities and the public additional specificity for several sections of HB 3382. I will not repeat that information here. I also attended the geographic hearing on Tuesday to expand on those comments. It surprised me to learn the agency sees this exception for the Coos Estuary as a local issue, one that does not warrant any further rulemaking. The goal exception is not geographically big enough to be an important issue for the agency. So when we get an application from the port or the tribes to do something that requires this exception, our planning staff and those of us interested in assessing whether the application has merit will just have to muddle through the ambiguous language of the bill and hope for the best. As you take your tour tomorrow, I hope the DLCD staff will point out to you when you are driving on what used to be the Coos Bay Estuary. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Hodder. I want to bring up in person Christine Moffitt, Nora Twilliger, and Bob Morrow. Start off with Christine Moffitt.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm Dr. Christine Moffitt. I'm a fisheries scientist with more than 50 years in the policy arena. And I am providing for you a little flyer today of an event called the Oregon Story that's going to be shown Wednesday evening at her historic Egyptian Theater. It's about the history of what you are now holding up and the battles that many of us that are of the age to remember all of those things. And I would urge that you continue to respect that this is a unique place and there are no other states that successfully work to balance natural productivity of the land, coastal and aquatic resources with the challenges of human developments and public input. I ask you to consider the goals and the history of this powerful legislation as you make your decisions today and tomorrow. The impact of the 3382 legislation is not minimal, as it details the process for an exception from an existing estuary management zoning, not specific to one limited area, but to the entire section of the Federal Navigation Channel. There are no limits provided. We have been informed of the existing project proposal that likely would double the size of the existing Federal Navigation Channel, creating a large turning basin and provide access to shoreland developments of berths and wharfs that are presently designated conservation and natural designations. This is a major transformative change of an entire estuary. I urge you to amend the proposed rules to include added detailed guidance for any submission to include appropriate economic analysis with details to justify markets, detailed proposed jobs, any proposed project and potential jobs lost as a result of the impact to the estuary and the associated community. The rules need to specify a professional independent review of these details. The criteria needed to specify the project lifetime, as well as community support,
All of these things need to be there as guidance documents because we don't have the capacity to do this locally unless there are guidance documents. Proposals need to address the consequences of modifications on the productivity of codependent fish and wildlife communities, tourism, and related industries. Identification and clarity of anticipated financing sources need to provide clear estimates of the cost, funding, and feasibility of success of proposed alterations and include funding for proposed mitigation costs and loss that result from these quote improvements. I know my time is up and I provided a written copy that I hope can be distributed to you for further information. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next is Nora Twilliger.
Thank you for this opportunity to comment on the proposed rulemaking. My name is Nora Terwilliger, and I've been a resident of the Port District of Coos Bay since 1970. I'm a biology professor emerita of the University of Oregon and the Oregon Institute of Marine Biology, OIMB. My husband and I moved from Boston, Massachusetts to Charleston, Oregon with our 2 young children back in 1970 because of the Coos Bay Estuary and OIMB's location there. Although I'm retired now, I've studied the worms and the crabs and the shrimp and other organisms of Coos Bay. I've traipsed through a lot of mudflats and intertidal. I've taught undergraduate, graduate students, elementary school students, residents of Coos Bay, and carried out research on the animals and their connections with the bay. This fall, I visited the DLCD's exhibition at the Oregon Historical Society in Portland, entitled Observing the Past, Planning the Future, 50 Years of Oregon Land Use Planning, which has been mentioned earlier in today's hearing for your 50th anniversary. I thought it was a great display. I found it really enjoyable. I loved the maps of actual land use planning examples. And I also enjoyed seeing the replica of the signed Senate Bill 100 that was posted there. I felt really proud of Oregon for its vision for conservation and development in Oregon and as a model for the rest of the country. I felt really proud for my small role as a charter member of Coos County District 5 Planning Committee. I remembered how my neighbors and I living in Charleston would meet in the cafeteria of the former Charleston Elementary School in the evenings. We would come together and we would study maps and current uses. And in the daytime, we would drive around and ground truth the maps. So we were helping to contribute to land use planning and to the establishment of the first National Estuarine Research Reserve, back then called South Slough Sanctuary. I also felt dismayed because of the passage of HB 3382, which seemed to be deliberately designed to exempt the Port of Coos Bay, and only this port, from observing statewide planning goals and to allow the removal of environmental protections in the Coos Bay Estuary for the purpose of deep draft navigation channel improvements. These improvements include establishing new or modifying existing channels beyond the existing navigation channel. So in 2023, we celebrated SB 100 and 50 years of exemplary land use planning in Oregon. And in 2024, we're faced with HB 3382 and the demise of a balanced approach to development and conservation in the Coos Bay Estuary. So I urge DLCD to adopt stringent criteria and granting exemptions from protection for habitats that are adjoining the Federal Navigation Channel in Coos Bay. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And next we're going to have Bob Morrow, and then I'd like Diana Gabb to come up to the front afterwards.
Bob.
Dana, sorry, did I say Diane? Dana.
Bob Morrow, Langlois, Oregon. I'm a retired stevedore, and I'm going to be addressing mostly the business side of this, which is something I'm familiar with. HB 3382 was so poorly written that it had to be whittled down in Salem, and it became clear that it was just for blasting and digging a deeper, wider hole into the Coos Bay Estuary. You are being asked to approve evasive exemptions to decades-old gold too. You are expected to do so, not for the welfare of all the ports in the state of Oregon, but to justify a single poorly conceived vision of Coos Bay becoming a major West Coast container port. If Maersk, the second largest shipping line in the world, could not justify building a container port here, that should be your canary in the coal mine for what a good idea this one is. The modern business model for terminals is for the shipping lines to be invested in the terminal. Do you believe that with decreased global demand and significant excess terminal capacity at their own facilities in Long Beach and Oakland and Seattle and the East Coast and the Gulf Coast, that shipping line would want to make a long-term commitment to Coos Bay? The Port of Long Beach just announced plans this week to triple rail capacity with the goal of net zero emissions. Compare that to Coos Bay with its sketchy entrance, harbor entrance, and the only one-way in and out, 134-mile railroad through a mountain range that is prone to trees falling and landslides. A rail line without a tunnel that can accept a standard too-high rail car. And what of the brand new rail transfer in Millersburg that is foundering? Follow the money on that project. Coos Bay that wants to compete with Portland, a port that just asked for $10 million to subsidize the terminal. If that single rail line access is closed, will time-critical cargo be allowed by DOT on an already overburdened Highway 101? Dredge it and they will come is not a business plan. But if you follow the money, it will flow out of the area, not to the people who live in Coos Bay. It will flow to principal stakeholders, large corporations, Kansas City, out of state labor. Maybe a lucky 30 jobs will come out of it. Running ahead here, I recommend that you rework the exemptions so that they require submissions to be smart, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Please do not truss up an environmental disaster along with an economic one. Demand the hard details, require a third-party follow-up, not only on jobs and money, but the environment as well. Don't trust the Coos Bay estuary's future to the fox saying he will guard the henhouse. Be smart about it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Dana Gab. Okay.
Dana Cobb. I've lived here since 1974, and I'm not a marine biologist or anything, but I've spent an awful lot of time on the beaches, both inside and outside of the North Spit, and have lived here enough to see and be a part of mostly opposition for all the projects that the port has tried to get into Coos Bay and turn this into that large cargo port. At any rate, hey, I want to kind of start with a quote from a Sand County Almanac. A thing is right if it tends to preserve the integrity, the stability, and the beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong if it tends otherwise. That's Aldo Leopold, Sand County Almanac. Major concern is red flags for me was this net zero harm. I've spent my life, I'm a builder, and I have some idea of volume, and I've been informed that there'd be up to 18 million cubic yards removed from Coos Bay, much of it blasted. 18 million is a pretty big pile, whether it's dollars or yards or whatever it is. But and then that's 18 million yards is going to go out and destroy not only destroy Coos Bay coming out of there, but it's going to go out to the ocean and ruin that habitat out there. So I don't get it. This project is nothing but money making money, and it's greed following greed after more and more and more. Aldo Leopold would be appalled, and he'd be up here at this microphone too if he lived here and was still alive. Guarantee that. So I think that's pretty much what I have to share. And yes, thank you.
For your testimony. I think that's all I have for public comment, just checking. Okay. So, I think now we are going to open up for deliberation, but I think questions from the commission to our staff, director, legal counsel. Commissioner Boyer.
I have a question for staff. In one of the public comments, it said that there was no interpretation done by the can anybody answer to that?
Yeah, want to bring up Megan.
Thank you, Chair Holova and Mr. Boyer. Yeah, we are proposing to adopt the language directly from the statute. So that includes no interpretation by the agency.
Thank you. Commissioner Lazo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lisa and Meg, while you're up here, and maybe Palmer can answer this too. Did the department, the agency, play a role in the development or the negotiation of the legislation at all during the session?
Commissioner Lazo, yes, we were involved in the negotiations. Alexis can maybe answer more.
Chair Holova, Commissioner Lazo, yes. There were multiple conversations that we were involved in.
Sorry, could you say who you are?
I'm sorry, I'm Alexis Hammer, the Legislative Policy Coordinator. And I would say that based on the initial concerns that we had around the bill exempting all ports from land use in general, we were responsible for helping craft the legislation to a much narrower provision for applying just for the improvement of national navigation channels in Coos Bay.
Another question, Chair, and this is maybe for legal counsel. It's the question about do nothing. So if we don't pass this conforming rulemaking, this is already in Oregon laws. If, as Meg said, if an application came in, it would, how would it be processed, and how would it be processed differently if we pass conforming rulemaking?
That's a really good question, Commissioner Lazo. And in essence, the answer is not at all. The statute is in effect currently. The advantage of putting this into your administrative rule is if someone is looking for a place, they're generally interested in what are the reasons, exceptions that are available under state law. It identifies without going into the specifics that are in the statute itself. I mean, that was the idea, was just reference it as a guidepost for someone looking for the kind of this full spectrum of reasons, exceptions that are available. They would find it here if they were otherwise aware of the statute, but not to go into the, not to repeat the statute, because then you have a situation where, anytime it's changed, we're doing a little conforming rule changing. And so my suggestion was just to reference the statute by number rather than try to repeat it verbatim in the rule.
Thank you.
Commissioner Boyer.
And maybe I missed it, but did we hear from the fisheries at all on this? I don't know if I've seen anything written or any comments from them.
Industry or
fisheries.
Commissioner Moyer, I have nothing that comes to mind about that.
So I have a question, Steve. When does our department decide? I mean, rulemaking is rulemaking, and we get RAC and TAC, and we're given provisions to do so. Or this isn't that. Are there any cases in which we do any further detail when it's just writing the rules into our doing what's required of us, I guess?
Chair Halova, good question. The circumstance here is that many of the things that would normally be okay. So backing up, when the legislature adopts a rule or adopts a statute and puts it in a chapter 197 or 195 or 196 for us, we generally have rulemaking authority over that. So if there are terms in the statute that are unclear, what the case law would call delegative terms, you generally have the ability to provide definitions and clarity to those. In this instance, it's a little different because the statutory provisions that people seem to be suggesting would be interesting to perhaps define more are delegative terms, but they're terms that are used in other agencies' programs. So, for example, mitigation is more of a DSL program, Department of State Lands program, and so we wouldn't be really adopting necessarily a definition that conflicted with theirs. So in this instance, the suggestion was that not to engage in that type of rulemaking, just the more the general insert the provision into the rule.
It sounds like you're saying there's things that our department controls and defines, and then there's things that other departments.
Yeah, and we, in interest of institutional comity, you'd want our definition to look a lot like their definition. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult for an applicant or a local government to apply.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, ma'am. I've been hearing about the economic condition of this area for a very long time, decades, really, ever since I've been in Oregon 40 years. I've really heard about the poverty here in Coos Bay and the surrounding area and the issues of, again, human suffering that have derived from that. I've also dealt with the legislators involved and former Representative Clem. The negotiation process that included our agency that defined a legislative intent that seemed pretty clear, that also includes, as far as I can tell, adequate safeguards to address the very real concerns about the effect on the natural world, leads me to think that Commissioner Lazo's question is, what should we do? Have we done enough? Should there be more as we're being asked to do, or have we done our job? And I guess that's a question for legal counsel. In your mind, if we approve this proposed language for this administrative rule, have we done our job adequately?
Yeah, you're putting me on the razor thin edge of legal and policy, and yes, you've done your job. Could you do more? That's a policy question, perhaps, and but in terms of legal sufficiency, putting this into the rule, it does serve the purposes I stated earlier of helping people identify it. The statute exists. We're not in a position to kind of change the legislative intent of the statute, I don't believe. So with that kind of sideboard, you probably have done enough in this instance to not stray into the policy piece of it.
Please forgive me if I put you in an uncomfortable situation.
That's why I get to travel to Coos Bay.
Vice Chair Laylock.
Are we in a position where, if we're finished with questions, to begin to discuss where we may?
Yes. And I just wanted to, for other folks that are about the next agenda item. So the next agenda item was supposed to start at 10:45. So we're 30 minutes behind. However, I think the next agenda item might be shorter. So yes, I think we should deliberate now.
Thank you. I look at this as we're not approving the project. This is the avenue for an applicant to propose this at the local level. And one of the, and as a former community development director for a county, and I've been involved in a lot of exceptions, and I've seen some successful and some not. And the no net loss standard, among all of the others, are very, very high standards. I almost was thinking through our very distinguished speakers, which were just extraordinary with information. I'm almost thinking of us being in a planning commission role or a board of county commission role. And that's where one of the ways I think about this is if we were to go down the path of more detailed rulemaking definitions, standards for a fairly specific area and potentially a fairly specific project, we almost may become the de facto local governing body. And I think that's what this did, this very carefully compromised legislation, which it was helpful to hear about the legislative background this morning. I hadn't heard about that until today. Knowing where it started to where it ended up, I think this is where it should be. So I will just share with the chair and my fellow commissioners two pieces. Number one, I will be supporting the motion by staff as proposed. And number two, I hope that everybody that participated this morning really actively engages in the local process if and when it is approved, or before that happens, to engage your local planning offices, city or county, and ask them to think about additional standards, because they could also make local policy choices and decisions prior to an application being submitted, because local governments, just like the commission, can often be, and our attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, but can often be more restrictive, but not less. And that's what we're being asked. So thank you, Chair. That's where I'm at this point.
Yeah, and I would agree. And that's why I asked the questions about, Commissioner Lazo with his, if you don't do anything, it still happens. And by putting it in our books, it kind of ties us to future things that it sounds like that may come up, right? We're now a participant in understanding in the future. But also, also the fact that the definitions, because I've seen when we've done, we need more rulemaking on definitions. There are things that are in our world, right? Versus these are things that are in that long list of other agencies, local and statewide world. So I'm looking at Steve to say, am I saying that correctly? But that's the way it's seeming. It's a very narrow window for us to be dipping into other people's definitions. So I'm also supportive of the motion. And like the vice chair said, we're not approving a project here, right? And we have been handed legislation not crafted by ourselves. So yeah, it's a very specific case, it feels. Any other commissioner deliberation before, if someone wants to make a motion? Commissioner Boyer.
Where do I start? Just, I heard all of you today for public comment, and I did want to acknowledge we got lots of written comment also, and I can't identify all of them, right? But I do like to acknowledge that we received them and read them. So thank you very much for engaging in this public process. So, I don't see this as, if we approve this today, the language, it doesn't mean this is a fast track for this particular project. I sit on the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and I have overseen a lot of estuary projects, and the permitting process is intense. There are a lot of eyes on it. Like I said, it's not a fast track, and I have complete confidence in the process of the permitting for a project like this. And then I will put on my agricultural hat, and with the loss of the terminal in Portland for moving agricultural products, it's been really hurtful to some of the wheat industry. So, I see this as a positive in that arena. So, with that, I will be voting for this today.
Commissioners, does anyone want to make a motion or further deliberation? Commissioner Lazo.
I'll just add a comment about, I think to echo what Commissioner Boyer said, I appreciate the folks that showed up here today that brought written testimony and have approached this issue with such passion. I liken it to, from my perspective as a housing person, to some of the processes we see in land use related to housing. That what we sometimes see is when a when a 6-story apartment building goes up down the block from your house, there's a public meeting and lots of folks show up and say, that's going to change the character of our neighborhood. When what actually happened was 20 years ago, when your comp plan was developed and that site was designated as multifamily, that's what was starting to change the character of your neighborhood. And my sense is, if the quick Google research I did here was correct, that that Coos Bay was designated as a development deep draft port in 1977, and that put in motion how we got here today. My sense is there might be some folks in this room who have been as part of this discussion since 1977 and earlier. And but to me, that's not what today is about, and not what as our legal counsel advises us, what our job is today. It doesn't minimize the passion and the impact that you folks have, but I think it's a different question than we're going to be answering today. So with some difficulty, I would also support a motion to support the conforming rulemaking.
Vice Chair, would you like to make a motion, or Commissioner Warren?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for everyone who showed up today and passionately spoke about your opposition to this project. I think it's well heard on this commission. I can tell you, as someone who's been listening and reading to your comments, we took it very seriously. I don't think that this is the right place to stop this project, right? There's nothing that we can do to help you get to that place, unfortunately. I do think that there are other forces out there that will stop this project, but also probably would have already been built. So with that, I'll offer a motion to make a motion. I move that the commission adopt the proposed revisions to OAR Chapter 660, Division 4, included as Attachment A to comply with the language in House Bill 3382.
Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Jan, could you do the roll call?
Commissioner Warren,
Aye.
Commissioner Boyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Lazo,
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Lilac, Chair Halova.
And with that, the motion passes on the conforming rulemaking. I was thinking of not taking a break, if you're okay with that. Are you okay? I was just looking. We can always, you can always slip out if you need to. We're going to have agenda item number 5 now, which is the rulemaking around Target Industries OAR 660 Division 9 with Lee McVeigh, the Economic Development Specialist, and Gordon Howard, Community Service Division Manager.
Chair Halova and Commissioners, I'm Gordon Howard with the Community Services Division Manager, and I'm here to introduce Lee McElvain, who's our Economic Development Specialist, who will be presenting this item for initiation of rulemaking related to Goal 9 Economic Development.
Thank you, Gordon. Good morning, Chair Halova, Vice Chair Lilac, members of the Commission. My name is Lee McElvain. I serve as Economic Development Specialist here at the department. Today, the department is requesting that the Commission initiate rulemaking under Goal 9 Economic Development to clarify the use of the target industries approach through amendments to Oregon Administrative Rule Chapter 660, Division 9. We are requesting that today the Commission review and approve the draft rulemaking charge included in your packet, as well as approve the list of interested parties proposed for representation on the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, or RAC. The Target Industries Approach rulemaking was approved during the Commission's November meeting as a part of the department's policy agenda. If initiated today, the department will convene a RAC that is scheduled to meet throughout the spring and early summer. Our intention is to bring proposed amendments to Chapter 660, Division 9 to the Commission in September this year, with a final adoption hearing scheduled for December. I want to provide a succinct background on this issue to help inform the feedback that you provide on our draft charge and proposed RAC today. The target industries approach is a method of quantifying land demand in an economic opportunities analysis, which is the tool that cities use to forecast long-range employment land demand. The target industries approach is commonly used, but it is undefined in administrative rule. Cities are increasingly relying on this approach to justify inclusion of sites of specific sizes and characteristics in their economic opportunities analysis, or EOA, in advance of an urban growth boundary expansion. The department is supportive of a high degree of flexibility in how cities plan to accommodate economic development opportunities, but is concerned that recent uses of the target industries approach fail to connect local employment growth to land demand in a meaningful way. This rulemaking is intended to help define the target industries approach for cities so that planning work results in a well-justified employment land demand that is less vulnerable to legal challenge. I'll make sure our slide is advancing here. So before I get into the target industries approach itself, I'll just quickly recap how most cities estimate the majority of long-range employment land demand. Every economic opportunities analysis is required to include an assessment of national, state, or regional trends that inform the expected employment growth that will occur locally in a city over the 20-year planning horizon. A city usually then estimates its own expected job growth as either a function of employment growth or as a function of forecasted population growth. Once the job growth estimates are complete, that number is then translated into land quantity through analysis in the EOA. There are several established methods for doing this, but the Division 9 rules that provide the process for an EOA do not specify how this analysis must be organized. For example, one method of estimating land demand would involve calculating a ratio of employees per acre in different industries or use types, or extrapolating forward the ratio of population or employment to the amount of developed land. The target industries approach relies on industry information that might be included in the EOA to provide justification for particular site needs. It's a form of expert consultation that would be included in the EOA, and it is most commonly used for one or two industries in addition to more traditional methods of estimating employment land demand. So I'll now describe what the target industries approach actually is and some of the issues that the department is seeking to clarify with this rulemaking. As a point of clarification, you'll see the phrase target industries used in different ways in EOAs. A lot of the time, this simply refers to the high-paying sectors that are a good match for the locational factors of the city. And that basically just means that those are sectors that hold a lot of potential for the community and perhaps will be receiving special attention through economic development activities. It is not the same thing as a target industries approach, which is a method of asserting land need. Many cities have used a target industries approach to anticipate sites for a particular industry or demonstrate land demand for a targeted business. How a city might go about that is undefined in administrative rule, but a city's ability to assert a need for a specific type of site is both useful and practical. Consideration of site characteristics that support positive economic development outcomes is necessary to effective comprehensive planning. Under the target industries approach, a city would identify a particular industry or perhaps a business already located in the community that is looking to expand, then characterize the typical development needs of that industry or business, generally, but not always focused on site size. Oftentimes, this would be used for a more land consumptive industry that doesn't fall neatly into an employment density calculation, for example, a warehousing and distribution facility or a data center. A city applying the target industries approach is very likely going to use this analysis as its rationale for an urban growth boundary expansion. The department's read on this approach, when applied thoughtfully, is that it's fully within the intended flexibility of the Division 9 rules. Not every economic development outcome needs to be a job created. However, recent applications of this approach are demonstrating an increasing disconnection between local job growth projections and land need, meaning that the statutorily required trend analysis doesn't have a relationship to the employment land demand that's asserted in the EOA. The draft charge seeks to address this concern by guiding the RAC to consider this issue. The department also has concerns that the term industry is undefined, which leads to confusion about how broadly this approach should be applied across the various sectors of the local economy. The site needs of a particular and specific industry sector can be easily characterized and described in an EOA, but recent applications of the target industries approach have broadened the term industry to the extent that it would be difficult to tailor specific site needs or economic development activities in support of a particular type of business. This approach also sometimes conflates use type, for example, a business park, with industry, which is a productive economic activity. As drafted, the rulemaking directs the RAC to consider and provide resolution on this question. The department recommends that the RAC should receive direction that employment growth forecasting should not be addressed as a part of this rulemaking. The aspirational quality of Goal 9 largely rests on a city's ability to adjust its growth forecast based on local economic conditions and community preferences and needs. So focusing this rulemaking on how growth forecasts relate to land demand should sufficiently address the department's concerns about the target industries approach. The interests that the department anticipates should be represented on the RAC are here. Staff anticipate that this will be a narrowly focused and a technical rulemaking, but it's important to the department that we have a range of perspectives represented on the RAC. This list of interested parties has been informed by the suggestions of both the Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee and the Local Officials Advisory Committee. The department's proposed RAC composition will provide the perspectives of subject matter experts and jurisdictions subject to Division 9, those that could benefit from the rule, and advocates for economic and climate justice. To meet our tight timeline for rulemaking this year, staff have already begun accepting applications from community members interested in serving on this RAC. If the commission would like to amend the list of proposed interests on the RAC, staff can adjust the application or selection process accordingly, as it doesn't close until mid-February. Staff requests that today, the commission consider and approve the draft rulemaking charge. If approved, this charge would provide guidance and operating principles for the RAC as they begin their work. This draft charge is included in your packet under agenda item 5, attachment A, and I apologize for the font size on the slide, but the charge directs the RAC to define the target industries approach and related terms through amendments to Division 9, to identify appropriate applications for the target industries approach, to not impact the flexibility of employment growth forecasting as it's currently exercised by cities, to establish guidance to help cities connect projected job growth to land need, to rely on existing case law and resources to inform amendments, to consider establishing a voluntary safe harbor to allow cities to rely on designated sources to justify land need under this approach, and to include provisions that protect or preserve sites that are identified through the target industries approach. I should note that during review, staff noticed that we have erroneously included the term stakeholder in the draft charge. We've introduced a modification to the proposed motion that would replace that term with interested parties. And that concludes my presentation, unless Gordon has anything to add.
No, I don't. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you in advance for your questions, Chair Lover, Vice Chair Lilac, and members of the commission.
As an order of business, do we ask questions first or get public testimony? I don't think there is any public testimony. Okay. So any commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Boyer.
Thank you. As I'm thinking of the RAC makeup. And there's one particular project that comes to mind for this, and it affects agricultural land. So I'm curious if somebody from the ag industry should be part of the RAC. And I don't know if it fits or not, but it just kind of struck me that agriculture would be affected by some of these projects. So I'm just throwing it out there.
Thank you for the suggestion, Chair Lova, Commissioner Boyer. We've also received some comment that we don't currently have any counties or a proposed county representation on the RAC, so that might be an interesting addition as well.
Commissioner Boyer. More specifically, I think maybe reaching out to the Farm Bureau and they might be able to help at that level might be where it should be and not the local. But yeah, I don't know what it looks like. It just came to my mind.
I was also curious on, I think it said real estate consulting firms, but it made me wonder if developers should be on it in the sense of the people, consulting firms can usually deal on the kind of macro, not macro, but like trends and versus the specific, needs that come up or issues that come up at the actual development level. So I don't know.
Yeah, thank you for the comment, Chair Lova. I do think that's an appropriate suggestion. And with the term real estate consulting firms or firms experienced with conducting an economic opportunities analysis, I think that could be very widely interpreted as the department considers the applicants that we receive for service on the RAC.
I'm not trying to grow it, but that is a specific niche that's important. And the thing I'm saying is like totally separate to that. Real estate developer has a whole different other set. They're thinking sites and specifics versus economic development, which is super important. So I wouldn't want to suggest one at the exclusion of the other.
Chair Halova, both you and Commissioner Boyer, we certainly have no objection to adding a member of a developer interest and also someone with interest in agriculture. I think another interest that agriculture might have in this is in terms, agriculture processing is a sector and could be a targeted industry, and so I think that's a good addition as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Warren.
Looking at the rulemaking charge, can you talk more about the safe harbor option and specifically what designated sources means?
Chair Lova, Commissioner Warren, thank you for the question. As I was drafting this rulemaking charge, it occurred to me that many cities using the target industries approach are actually looking to the department for guidance on what sort of source they might cite as a definitive authority to provide a rationale for targeting a particular industry and identifying its site needs. So it occurred to me that this would actually be a very useful tool for communities to have. The first thing that occurred to me was perhaps the site selection matrix that's published by Business Oregon, but that is one of probably several options that could be considered by the RAC. Citing a document like this could be considered a safe harbor approach in some way if the rule were amended to identify such a tool.
Commissioner Warren.
This is just more of a philosophical question once again. Has there been any thought to tying in adequate housing to these considerations? It's pretty hard to grow industry if you don't have adequate workforce, and not saying we should go that direction, just saying, has there been any thinking around that for this?
I'm glad that you bring up that question. I think a large part of the reasoning that the department has decided to take this on is that we have seen the target industries approach represent a departure from comprehensive planning at the local level, where employment growth and expected population growth are not very well connected any longer in long-range planning processes. And so our expectation is that the RAC will help to amend Division 9 to ensure that job growth that is identified through the target industries approach is accounted for in other elements of comprehensive plans, including housing elements.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. From a rural county that doesn't have a lot of staff, we often rely on our regional economic development agency because they are at that mid-level where they can see broader trends and still specific applications. Since Gordon says we can grow this group, I'm going to take him at his word and offer that as a potential additional source of rec participation in this group.
Let me go back one slide. Thank you for the suggestion, Commissioner Thompson. Chair Halova. Just for the record, we have proposed that economic development districts, which for many regions of the state serve as a regional economic development agency, be represented on the RAC. If there are additional economic development organizations that should be considered for representation or participation, I think that they could probably be considered under economic development interests here. Yeah, thank you.
Any more comments? Vice Chair Leland?
Probably the only one is, and I appreciate the inclusion of county